The Tale of Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle, written by Beatrix Potter, read by Chuck Brown. Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Lucy, who lived at a farm called Littletown. She was a good little girl, only she was always losing her pocket handkerchiefs. One day, little Lucy came into the farmyard crying. Oh, she did cry so. "I've lost my pocket handkin, 3 handkins and a penny. Have you seen them, Tabby Kitten?" The kitten went on washing her white paws, so Lucy asked a speckled hen, "Sally Hennypenny, have you found 3 pocket handkins?" But the speckled hen ran into a barn, clucking, "I go barefoot, barefoot, barefoot." And then Lucy asked Cock Robin, sitting on a twig. Cock Robin looked sideways at Lucy with his bright black eye, and he flew over a stile and away. Lucy climbed upon the stile and looked up at the hill behind Littletown, a hill that goes up, up into the clouds as though it had no top. And a great way up the hillside, she thought she saw some white things spread upon the grass. Lucy scrambled up the hill as fast as her stout legs would carry her. She ran along a steep pathway, up and up, until Littletown was right away down below. She could have dropped a pebble down the chimney. Presently she came to a spring, bubbling out from the hillside. Someone had stood a tin can upon a stone to catch the water, but the water was already running over, for the can was no bigger than an egg cup, and where the sand upon the path was wet, there were footmarks of a very small person. Lucy ran on and on. The path ended under a big rock. The grass was short and green, and there were clothes, props cut from bracken stems, with lines of plaited rushes and a heap of tiny clothespins, but no pocket handkerchiefs. But there was something else, a door, straight into the hill, and inside it someone was singing. "Lily white and clean, oh, with little frills between, oh, smooth and hot, red rusty spot, never here be seen, oh." Lucy knocked once, twice, and interrupted the song. A little frightened voice called out, "Who's that?" Lucy opened the door, and what do you think there was inside the hill? A nice, clean kitchen with a flagged floor and wooden beams, just like any other farm kitchen. Only the ceiling was so low that Lucy's head nearly touched it, and the pots and pans were small, and so was everything there. There was a nice, hot, singy smell, and at the table, with an iron in her hand, stood a very stout short person staring anxiously at Lucy. Her print gown was tucked up, and she was wearing a large apron over her striped petticoat. Her little black nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and underneath her cap, where Lucy had yellow curls, that little person had prickles. "Who are you?" said Lucy. "Have you seen my pocket handkins?" The little person made a bob curtsy. "Oh, yes, if you please'm. My name is Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Oh, yes, if you please'm. I'm an excellent clear starcher." And she took something out of a clothes basket and spread it on the ironing blanket. "What's that thing?" said Lucy. "That's not my pocket handkin." "Oh, no, if you please'm. That's a little scarlet waistcoat belonging to Cock Robin." And she ironed it and folded it and put it on one side. Then she took something else off a clothes horse. "That isn't my penny," said Lucy. "Oh, no, if you please'm. That's a damask tablecloth belonging to Jenny Wren. Look how it's stained with currant wine. It's very bad to wash," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and she fetched another hot iron from the fire. "There's one of my pocket handkins," cried Lucy, "and there's my penny." Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle ironed it and goffered it, and shook out the frills. "Oh, that is lovely," said Lucy. "And what are those long yellow things with fingers like gloves?" "Oh, that's a pair of stockings belonging to Sally Hennypenny. Look how she's worn the heels out with scratching in the yard. She'll very soon go barefoot," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Why, there's another hankersniff, but it isn't mine. It's red." "Oh, no, if you please'm. That one belongs to old Mrs. Rabbit, and it did so smell of onions. I've had to wash it separately. I can't get out the smell." "There's another one of mine," said Lucy. "What are those funny little white things?" "That's a pair of mittens belonging to Tabby Kitten. I only have to iron them. She washes them herself." "There's my last pocket handkin," said Lucy. "And what are you dipping into the basin of starch?" "They're little dicky shirt fronts belonging to Tom Titmouse. Most terrible particular," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Now I've finished my ironing, I'm going to air some clothes." "What are these dear, soft, fluffy things?" said Lucy. "Oh, those are the woolly coats belonging to the little lambs at Skelgel." "Will their jackets take off?" asked Lucy. "Oh, yes, if you please'm. Look at the sheep mark on the shoulder. And here's one marked for Gatesgarth, and 3 that come from Littletown. They're always marked at washing," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. And she hung up all sorts and sizes of clothes, small brown coats of mice, and one velvety black moleskin waistcoat, and a red tailcoat with no tail belonging to Squirrel Nutkin, and a very much shrunk blue jacket belonging to Peter Rabbit, and a petticoat, not marked, that had gone lost in the washing, and at last the basket was empty. Then Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle made tea, a cup for herself and a cup for Lucy. They sat before the fire on a bench and looked sideways at one another. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's hand, holding the teacup, was very, very brown, and very, very wrinkly with the soapsuds, and all through her gown and her cap there were hairpins sticking wrong end out, so that Lucy didn't like to sit too near her. When they had finished tea, they tied up the clothes in bundles, and Lucy's pocket handkerchiefs were folded up inside her clean pinny and fastened with a silver safety pin. And then they made up the fire with turf, and came out and locked the door, and hid the key under the door-sill. Then away down the hill trotted Lucy and Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle with the bundles of clothes. All the way down the path little animals came out of the fern to meet them. The very first that they met were Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny, and she gave them their nice clean clothes, and all the little animals and birds were so very much obliged to dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle, so that at the bottom of the hill, when they came to the stile, there was nothing left to carry except Lucy's one little bundle. Lucy scrambled up the stile with the bundle in her hand, and then she turned to say "Good night," and to thank the washerwoman. But what a very odd thing! Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle had not waited either for thanks or for the washing bill. She was running up the hill, and where was her white frilled cap, and her shawl, and her gown, and her petticoat? And how small she had grown, and how brown, and covered with prickles! Why, Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle was nothing but a hedgehog. Now some people say that little Lucy had been asleep upon the stile. But then how could she have found 3 clean pocket handkins and a penny pinned with a silver safety pin? And besides, I have seen that door into the back of the hill called Cat Bells, and besides, I am very well acquainted with dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. The End. The Tale of Pigling Bland, written by Beatrix Potter, read by Chuck Brown. Once upon a time there was an old pig called Aunt Potatoes. She had 8 of a family, 4 little girl pigs called Crosspatch, Suck-Suck, Yuck-Yuck, and Spot, and 4 little boy pigs called Alexander, Pigling Bland, Chin-Chin, and Stumpy. Stumpy had an accident to his tail. The 8 little pigs had very fine appetites. Yes, yes, yes! "They eat, and indeed they do eat," said Aunt Petitos, looking at her family with pride. Suddenly there were fearful squeals. Alexander had squeezed inside the hoops of the pig trough and stuck. Aunt Petitos and I dragged him out by the hind legs. Chin Chin was already in disgrace. It was washing day, and he had eaten a piece of soap. And presently, in a basket of clean clothes, we found another dirty little pig. "Chut, tut, tut! Chut, tut, tut! Whichever is this?" grunted Aunt Petitos. Now all the pig family are pink, or pink with black spots, but this pig child was smutty black all over. When it had been popped into a tub, it proved to be Yak-Yak. I went into the garden. There I found Crosspatch and Suck-Suck rooting up carrots. I whipped them myself and led them out by the ears. Crosspatch tried to bite me. "Aunt Petitos, Aunt Petitos, you are a worthy person, but your family is not well brought up. Every one of them has been in mischief except Spot and Pigling Bland." "Yes, yes," signed Aunt Petitos. "And they drink bucketfuls of milk. I shall have to get another cow. Good little Spot shall stay at home to do the housework, but the others must go. 4 little boy pigs and 4 little girl pigs are too many altogether." "Yes, yes, yes," said Aunt Petitos. "There will be more to eat without them." So Chin Chin and Suck Suck went away in a wheelbarrow, and Stumpy, Yak-Yak, and Crosspatch rode away in a cart. And the other 2 little boy pigs, Pigling Bland and Alexander, went to market. We brushed their coats, we curled their tails, and washed their little faces, and wished them goodbye in the yard. Aunt Petitos wiped her eyes with a large pocket handkerchief. Then she wiped Pigling Bland's nose and shed tears. Then she wiped Alexander's nose and shed tears. Then she passed the handkerchief to Spot. Aunt Petitos sighed and grunted, and addressed those little pigs as follows. "Now, Pigling Bland, son Pigling Bland, you must go to market. Take your brother Alexander by the hand. Mind your Sunday clothes, and remember to blow your nose." Aunt Petitos passed around the handkerchief again. "Beware of traps, hen roosts, bacon, and eggs. Always walk upon your hind legs." Pigling Bland, who was a sedate little pig, looked solemnly at his mother. A tear trickled down his cheek. Aunt Petitos turned to the other. "Now, son Alexander, take the hand." "Wee, wee, wee," giggled Alexander. "Take the hand of your brother Pigling Bland. You must go to market, mind." "Wee, wee, wee," interrupted Alexander again. "You put me out," said Aunt Petitos. "Observe signposts and milestones. Do not gobble herringbones. And remember," said I impressively, "if you once cross the county boundary, you cannot come back. Alexander, you are not attending. Here are 2 licenses permitting 2 pigs to go to market in Lancashire. Attend, Alexander. I have had no end of trouble in getting these papers from the policeman." Pigling Bland listened carefully. Alexander was hopelessly volatile. I pinned the papers for safety inside their waistcoat pockets. Aunt Petitos gave to each a little bundle, and 8 conversation peppermints with appropriate moral sentiments in screws of paper. Then they started. Pigling Bland and Alexander trotted along steadily for a mile. At least Pigling Bland did. Alexander made the road half as long again by skipping from side to side. He danced about and pinched his brother, singing, "This pig went to market. This pig stayed home. This pig had a bit of meat. Let's see what they have given us for dinner, Pigling." Pigling Bland and Alexander sat down and untied their bundles. Alexander gobbled up his dinner in no time. He had already eaten all his own peppermints. "Give me one of yours, please, Pigling." "But I wish to preserve them for emergencies," said Pigling Bland doubtfully. Alexander went into squeals of laughter. Then he pricked Pigling with the pin that had fastened his pig paper. And when Pigling slapped him, he dropped the pin and tried to take Pigling's pin, and the papers got mixed up. Pigling Bland reproved Alexander. But presently they made it up again and trotted away together, singing, Tom, Tom the piper's son, stole a pig and away he ran, but all the tune that he could play was over the hills and far away. What's that, young sirs? Stole a pig? Where are your licenses? Said the policeman. They had nearly run against him round a corner. Pigling Bland pulled out his paper. Alexander, after fumbling, handed over something scrumply. 2 2.5-ounce conversation sweeties at 3 farthings. What's this? This ain't a license. Alexander's nose lengthened visibly. He had lost it. I had one, indeed I had, Mr. Policeman. It's not likely they let you start without it. I am passing the farm. You may walk with me. Can I come back too? Inquired Pigling Bland. I see no reason, young sir. Your paper is all right. Pigling Bland did not like going on alone, and it was beginning to rain. But it is unwise to argue with the police. He gave his brother a peppermint and watched him out of sight. To conclude the adventures of Alexander, the policeman sauntered up to the house about tea time, followed by a damp, subdued little pig. I disposed of Alexander in the neighborhood. He did fairly well when he had settled down. Pigling Bland went on alone dejectedly. He came to crossroads and a signpost. To Market Town, 5 miles. Over the hills, 4 miles. To Petito's farm, 3 miles. Pigling Bland was shocked. There was little hope of sleeping in Market Town, and tomorrow was the hiring fair. It was deplorable to think how much time had been wasted by the frivolity of Alexander. He glanced wistfully along the road towards the hills, and then set off walking obediently the other way, buttoning up his coat against the rain. He had never wanted to go, and the idea of standing all by himself in a crowded market to be stared at, pushed, and hired by some big strange farmer was very disagreeable. I wish I could have a little garden and grow potatoes, said Pigling Bland. He put his cold hand in his pocket and felt his paper. He put his other hand in his other pocket and felt another paper, Alexander's. Pigling squealed. Then he ran back frantically, hoping to overtake Alexander and the policeman. He took a wrong turn, several wrong turns, and was quite lost. It grew dark. The wind whistled. The trees creaked and groaned. Pigling Bland became frightened and cried, "Wee, wee, wee! I can't find my way home." After an hour's wandering, he got out of the wood. The moon shone through the clouds, and Pigling Bland saw a country that was new to him. The road crossed a moor. Below was a wide valley with a river twinkling in the moonlight, and beyond, in misty distance, lay the hills. He saw a small wooden hut, made his way to it, and crept inside. "I am afraid it is a hen house, but what can I do?" said Pigling Bland, wet and cold and quite tired out. "Bacon and eggs, clucked a hen on a perch. "Trap, trap, trap, cackle, cackle, cackle," scolded the disturbed cockerel. To market, jiggity-jig," clutched a broody white hen roosting next to him. Pigling Bland, much alarmed, determined to leave at daybreak. In the meantime, he and the hens fell asleep. In less than an hour they were all awakened. The owner, Mr. Peter Thomas Piperson, came with a lantern and a hamper to catch 6 fowls to take to market in the morning. He grabbed the white hen roosting next to the cock. Then his eye fell upon Pigling Bland, squeezed up in a corner. He made a singular remark, "Hallo, here's another," seized Pigling by the scruff of his neck and dropped him into the hamper. Then he dropped in 5 more dirty, kicking, cackling hens upon the top of Pigling Bland. The hamper, containing 6 fowls and a young pig, was no light weight. It was taken downhill unsteadily with jerks. Pigling, although nearly scratched to pieces, contrived to hide the papers and peppermints inside his clothes. At last the hamper was bumped down upon a kitchen floor. The lid was opened, and Pigling was lifted out. He looked up, blinking, and saw an offensively ugly elderly man, grinning from ear to ear. "This one's come of himself, whatever," said Mr. Piperson, turning Pigling's pockets inside out. He pushed the hamper into a corner, threw a sack over it to keep the hens quiet, put a pot on the fire, and unlaced his boots. Pigling Bland drew forward a copy stool and sat on the edge of it, shyly warming his hands. Mr. Piperson pulled off a boot and threw it against the wainscot at the further end of the kitchen. There was a smothered noise. "Shut up," said Mr. Piperson. Pigling Bland warmed his hands and eyed him. Mr. Piperson pulled off the other boot and flung it after the first. There was again a curious noise. "Be quiet, will ye?" said Mr. Piperson. Pigling Bland sat on the very edge of the copy stool. Mr. Piperson fetched meal from a chest and made porridge. It seemed to Pigling that something at the further end of the kitchen was taking a suppressed interest in the cooking, but he was too hungry to be troubled by noises. Mr. Piperson poured out 3 platefuls, for himself, for Pigling, and a third. After glaring at Pigling, he put away with much scuffling and locked up. Pigling Bland ate his supper discreetly. After supper, Mr. Piperson consulted an almanac and felt Pigling's ribs. It was too late in the season for curing bacon, and he grudged his meal. Besides, the hens had seen this pig. He looked at the small remains of a flitch, and then looked undecidedly at Pigling. "You may sleep on the rug," said Mr. Peter Thomas Piperson. Pigling Bland slept like a top. In the morning, Mr. Piperson made more porridge. The weather was warmer. He looked to see how much meal was left in the chest, and seemed dissatisfied. "You'll likely be moving on again," said he to Pigling Bland. Before Pigling could reply, a neighbor, who was giving Mr. Piperson and the hens a lift, whistled from the gate. Mr. Piperson hurried out with the hamper, enjoining Pigling to shut the door behind him and not meddle with naught, "or I'll come back and skin ye," said Mr. Piperson. It crossed Pigling's mind that if he had asked for a lift, too, he might still have been in time for market. But he distrusted Peter Thomas. After finishing breakfast at his leisure, Pigling had a look round the cottage. Everything was locked up. He found some potato peelings in a bucket in the back kitchen. Pigling ate the peel and washed up the porridge plates in the bucket. He sang while he worked. Tom with his pipe made such a noise. He called up all the girls and boys, and they all ran to hear him play, over the hills and far away. Suddenly, a little smothered voice chimed in. "Over the hills and great way off, the wind shall blow my top-knot off." Pigling Bland put down a plate which he was wiping and listened. After a long pause, Pigling went on tiptoe and peeped round the corner into the front kitchen. There was nobody there. After another pause, Pigling approached the door of the locked cupboard and sniffed at the keyhole. It was quite quiet. After another long pause, Pigling pushed a peppermint under the door. It was sucked in immediately. In the course of the day, Pigling pushed in all the remaining 6 peppermints. When Mr. Piperson returned, he found Pigling sitting before the fire. He had brushed up the hearth and put on the pot to boil. The meal was not get-outable. Mr. Piperson was very affable. He slapped Pigling on the back, made lots of porridge, and forgot to lock the meal chest. He did lock the cupboard door, but without properly shutting it. He went to bed early, and told Pigling upon no account to disturb him next day before 12 o'clock. Pigling Bland sat by the fire eating his supper. All at once, at his elbow, a little voice spoke. "My name is Pigwig. Make me more porridge, please." Pigling Bland jumped and looked around. A perfectly lovely little black Berkshire pig stood smiling beside him. She had twinkly little screwed-up eyes, a double chin, and a short turned-up nose. She pointed at Pigling's plate. He hastily gave it to her and fled to the meal chest. "How did you come here?" asked Pigling Bland. "Stolen," replied Pigwig, with her mouth full. Pigling helped himself to meal without scruple. "What for?" "Bacon, hams," replied Pigwig cheerfully. "Why on earth don't you run away?" exclaimed the horrified Pigling. "I shall after supper," said Pigwig decidedly. Pigling Bland made more porridge and watched her shyly. She finished a second plate, got up, and looked about her as though she were going to start. "You can't go in the dark," said Pigling Bland. Pigwig looked anxious. Do you know your way by daylight?" "I know we can see this little white house from the hills across the river. Which way are you going, Mr. Pig?" "To market. I have 2 pig papers. I might take you to the bridge if you have no objection," said Pigling, much confused and sitting on the edge of his copy stool. Pigwig's gratitude was such, and she asked so many questions that it became embarrassing to Pigling Bland. He was obliged to shut his eyes and pretend to sleep. She became quiet, and there was a smell of peppermint. "I thought you had eaten them," said Pigling, waking suddenly. "Only the corners," replied. "I thought you had eaten them," said Pigling, waking suddenly. "Only the corners," replied Pigwig, studying the sentiments with much interest by the firelight. "I wish you wouldn't. He might smell them through the ceiling," said the alarmed Pigling. Pigwig put back the sticky peppermints into her pocket. "Sing something," she demanded. "I'm sorry, I have a toothache," said Pigling, much displayed. "Then I will sing," replied Pigwig. "You will not mind if I say itty-titty? I have forgotten some of the words." Pigling Bland made no objection. He sat with his eyes half shut and watched her. She wagged her head and rocked about, clapping time and singing in a sweet little grunty voice. "A funny old mother pig lived in a sty, and 3 little piggies had she. Tea-iddity-iddity, umph, and the little pig said, wee, wee." She sang successfully through 3 or 4 verses, only at every verse her head nodded a little lower, and her little twinkly eyes closed up. "Those 3 little piggies grew peaky and lean they might very well be, for somehow they couldn't say umph, and they wouldn't say wee, 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 for somehow they couldn't say—" Pigwig's head bobbed lower and lower until she rolled over, a little round ball, fast asleep on the hearthrug. Pigling Bland, on tiptoe, covered her up with an antimacassar. He was afraid to go to sleep himself. For the rest of the night he sat listening to the chirping of the crickets and to the snores of Mr. Piperson overhead. Early in the morning, between dark and daylight, Pigling tied up his little bundle and woke up Pigwig. She was excited and half frightened. "But it's dark. How can we find our way?" "The cock has crowed. We must start before the hens come out. They might shout to Mr. Piperson." Pigwig sat down again and commenced to cry. "Come away, Pigwig. We can see when we get used to it. Come, I can hear them clucking." Pigling had never said "sha" to a hen in his life, being peaceable, and also he remembered the hamper. He opened the house door quietly and shut it after them. There was no garden. The neighborhood of Mr. Piperson's was all scratched up by the fowls. They slipped away hand in hand across an untidy field to the road. The sun rose while they were crossing the moor, a dazzle of light over the tops of the hills. The sunshine crept down the slopes into the peaceful green valleys, where little white cottages nestled in gardens and orchards. "That's Westmoreland," said Pigwig. She dropped Pigling's hand and commenced to dance, singing, "Tom, Tom, the piper's son, stole a pig and away he ran, but all the tune that he could play was over the hills and far away." "Come, Pigwig, we must get to the bridge before folks are stirring." "Why do you want to go to market, Pigling?" inquired Pigwig presently. I want to grow potatoes." "Have a peppermint?" said Pigwig. Pigling Bland refused quite crossly. "Does your poor toothy hurt?" inquired Pigwig. Pigling Bland grunted. Pigwig ate the peppermint herself and followed the opposite side of the road. "Pigwig, keep under the wall. There's a man plowing." Pigwig crossed over. They hurried downhill towards the county boundary. Suddenly, Pigling stopped. He heard wheels. Slowly jogging up the road below them came a tradesman's cart. The reins flapped on the horse's back. The grocer was reading a newspaper. "Take that peppermint out of your mouth, Pigwig. We may have to run. Don't say one word. Leave it to me." And in sight of the bridge. said poor Pigling, nearly crying. He began to walk frightfully lame, holding Pigwig's arm. The grocer, intent upon his newspaper, might have passed them if his horse had not shied and snorted. He pulled the cross cartways and held down his whip. "Hello, where are you going to?" Pigling Bland stared at him vacantly. "Are you deaf? Are you going to market?" Pigling nodded slowly. "I thought as much. It was yesterday. Show me your license." Pigling stared at the off-hind shoe of the grocer's horse, which had picked up a stone. The grocer flicked his whip. "Papers? Pig license?" Pigling fumbled in all his pockets and handed up the papers. The grocer read them, but still seemed dissatisfied. "This here pig is a young lady. Is her name Alexander?" Pigwig opened her mouth and shut it again. Pigling coughed asthmatically. The grocer ran his finger down the advertisement column of his newspaper. "Lost, stolen, or strays. 10 shillings reward." He looked suspiciously at Pigwig. Then he stood up in the trap and whistled for the plowman. "You wait here while I drive on and speak to him," said the grocer, gathering up the reins. He knew that pigs are slippery, but surely such a very lame pig could never run. "Not yet, Pigwig. He will look back." The grocer did so. He saw the 2 pigs stock still in the middle of the road. Then he looked over at the horse's heels. It was lame also. The stone took some time to knock out after he got to the plowman. "Now, Pigwig, now," said Pigling Bland. Never did any pigs run as these pigs ran. They raced and squealed and pelted down the long white hill towards the bridge. Little fat Pigwig's petticoats fluttered, and her feet went pitter-patter-pitter as she bounded and jumped. They ran, and they ran, and they ran down the hill, and across a shortcut on a level green turf at the bottom, between pebble beds and rushes. They came to the river, they came to the bridge, they crossed it hand in hand. Then over the hills and far away she danced with Pigling Bland. The end. The Timekeeper's Mountain. Read by Chuck Brown. High in the northern mountains, where the snow never melted and the stars seemed close enough to touch, there stood a peculiar tower carved directly into the living rock of the mountainside. This was the home of Tick-Tock, the youngest timekeeper ever appointed to such an important position. At 12 years old, with wild copper hair that stuck out in all directions and bright green eyes that seemed to see everything at once, Tick-Tock had a job that was both wonderful and enormous. He was responsible for keeping time running smoothly for the entire valley below. The tower was filled with the most amazing collection of timepieces anyone could imagine. There were grandfather clocks taller than trees, with pendulums that swung with the rhythm of seasons changing. There were tiny pocket watches that measured the time between heartbeats, and enormous sundials that tracked the movement of planets across the sky. But the most important timepiece of all was the great clock at the very top of the tower. A massive mechanism made of crystal and starlight that kept all the time in the world synchronized and flowing properly. Tick-Tock lived in the tower with his best friend and helper, a talking raven named Kronos. Kronos was no ordinary bird. He was a time raven, with feathers that shimmered like black pearls and eyes that could see into both the past and the future. His job was to fly around the valley each day, checking to make sure that time was flowing correctly in all the villages and farms below. Every morning, Tick-Tock would wake up before dawn and climb the winding stairs to the top of the tower to wind the great clock. This wasn't just a matter of turning a key. It required careful attention to the rhythm of the universe, listening to the heartbeat of the earth, and feeling the pull of the moon and stars. The great clock had to be wound with exactly the right amount of energy to keep time flowing smoothly for the next 24 hours. As he wound the clock each morning, Tick-Tock would look out over the valley below and watch the world wake up. Farmers would begin their morning chores right on schedule. Children would head to school at exactly the right time, and even the animals seemed to know precisely when to start their daily activities. Everything in the valley depended on the steady, reliable flow of time that the great clock provided. But this particular morning, something was wrong. As Tick-Tock climbed the stairs to wind the great clock, he could hear an unusual sound. Instead of the steady, rhythmic ticking that should have been echoing through the tower, there was an irregular stuttering noise, like a heartbeat that kept skipping beats. "Kronos!" called Tick-Tock as he reached the clock room. "Something's wrong with the great clock." The time raven fluttered over to perch on Tick-Tock's shoulder, his black feathers ruffling with concern. "I can hear it too," Kronos said in his wise, creaky voice. "The rhythm is all wrong, and look at the crystal gears. They're not moving smoothly." Tick-Tock examined the great clock carefully. The massive mechanism was incredibly complex, with hundreds of crystal gears and springs made from crystallized moonlight. Normally, all the parts moved together in perfect harmony, creating a rhythm that was both steady and beautiful. But now, several of the gears were stuttering and jerking, and the entire clock seemed to be struggling to keep running. "When did this start?" asked Tick-Tock, running his hands over the crystal surfaces and feeling for problems. "I first noticed it yesterday evening," replied Kronos. "At first, I thought it was just a minor fluctuation, but it's been getting worse all night. And Tick-Tock, I think it's affecting the valley. When I flew my evening patrol yesterday, I noticed that some things were happening at the wrong times. The baker was opening his shop too early. Children were arriving at school before their teachers, and even the roosters were crowing at odd hours." Tick-Tock frowned with concentration. As the timekeeper, it was his responsibility to keep time flowing properly. And if the great clock was malfunctioning, it could cause serious problems for everyone in the valley. People depended on time to coordinate their lives, to know when to plant their crops, when to gather for important events, and when to rest. "We need to figure out what's causing this," said Tick-Tock. "Have you seen anything unusual in your flights around the valley?" Kronos preened his feathers thoughtfully. "Now that you mention it, there was something strange yesterday. I was flying over Willowbrook Village when I saw a group of travelers setting up camp near the Time Springs. They had wagons and equipment that I didn't recognize, and they seemed to be digging or excavating something." The Time Springs were a series of natural hot springs about halfway down the mountain, where underground streams carried some of the temporal energy from the great clock down into the valley. The springs were an important part of the time distribution system, helping to spread the steady flow of time throughout the entire region. "We should investigate," said Tick-Tock. "If someone is interfering with the time springs, that could definitely cause problems with the great clock." They quickly packed supplies for a journey down the mountain. Tick-Tock filled his pockets with small tools for clock repair, a special compass that pointed toward sources of temporal disturbance, and an emergency time crystal that could provide backup power if needed. Kronos stretched his wings and prepared for a long flight. The path down the mountain was steep and winding, carved into the rock face generations ago by the first Timekeepers. As they descended, Tick-Tock could feel the temporal disturbance growing stronger. His compass spun wildly, and he could sense that time was flowing unevenly, in some places too fast, in others too slow. When they reached the time springs, they found exactly what Kronos had described. A group of 3 travelers had set up an elaborate camp, with tents, equipment, and several large machines that hummed and whirred with mechanical energy. The travelers appeared to be digging around the springs themselves, and they had installed some kind of collection apparatus that was siphoning water and temporal energy from the natural pools. "Excuse me," called Tick-Tock as he approached the camp. "I'm the Timekeeper for this region. Could you tell me what you're doing here?" The leader of the group was a tall woman with silver hair and clothing made from strange shimmering fabric that seemed to shift and change color as she moved. When she turned to face Tick-Tock, he could see that her eyes were an unusual pale blue, and they seemed to flicker like candle flames. "Ah, the young Timekeeper," she said, in a voice that had an odd echoing quality. "My name is Temperance, and these are my assistants, Flux and Drift. We're researchers studying temporal phenomena. We're collecting samples of time-charged water for our experiments." The 2 assistants looked up from their work. Flux was a short, round man with wild gray hair, while Drift was tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to be looking at everything except what was directly in front of him. Both of them had the same flickering quality to their gaze as their leader. "I'm afraid you'll have to stop," said Tick-Tock, politely but firmly. "The time springs are protected. They're essential for distributing temporal energy throughout the valley, and interfering with them is causing serious problems with my great clock." Temperance smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Oh, my dear young Timekeeper, I don't think you understand. We're not just collecting samples, we're conducting a very important experiment. You see, we believe that time flows too rigidly in most places. People are slaves to schedules and clocks, always rushing from one appointment to the next. We're looking to create areas where time flows more freely." "Freely?" asked Kronos, landing on a rock near the spring. "What does that mean?" "It means," said Flux, speaking for the first time in a voice that seemed to come from far away, "that sometimes morning could last all day, or a weekend could stretch on for weeks, or a wonderful moment could repeat itself over and over. And sometimes," added Drift, his eyes focusing on something that wasn't there, "unpleasant times could speed by so quickly you'd barely notice them." Tick-Tock felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "That sounds terrible," he said. "People need time to flow steadily and predictably. How would farmers know when to plant their crops? How would families coordinate their activities? How would anything get done?" "Exactly," said Temperance with enthusiasm. "People wouldn't be controlled by time anymore. They would be free to experience each moment, as long or as short as they wanted." "But that's not freedom," protested Tick-Tock. "That's chaos. Time isn't meant to control people, it's meant to help them. It gives structure to life, helps people coordinate with each other, and ensures that everything happens when it's supposed to happen." As they talked, Tick-Tock could see that the researchers' equipment was drawing more and more temporal energy from the springs. The natural pools were beginning to look dull and lifeless, and he could feel the disturbance in the time flow getting stronger. "You have to stop this," he said urgently. "You're disrupting the entire temporal system for this region. The great clock is already starting to malfunction, and if this continues, time could become completely chaotic throughout the valley." "That's the point," said Temperance, her flickering eyes growing brighter. "We want to break the tyranny of regulated time. Soon, Our experimental zone will expand beyond this valley, and then beyond this region, until eventually the entire world will be free from the rigid constraints of clockwork time." Kronos ruffled his feathers angrily. "You're talking about destroying one of the fundamental forces that hold civilization together," he said. "Without proper time flow, everything would collapse." "Or everything would become infinitely more interesting," replied Drift dreamily. Tick-Tock realized that reasoning with the researchers wasn't going to work. They were so convinced that their experiment was beneficial that they couldn't see the damage they were causing. He would have to find another way to stop them and restore the proper flow of time to the region. "Kronos," he whispered while the researchers were focused on their equipment, "I need you to fly back to the tower and get the Master Time Crystal from the energy supplies. It's in the vault behind the Great Clock. Bring it here as quickly as you can." The Time Raven nodded and launched himself into the air, his powerful wings carrying him swiftly up the mountain path. While he was gone, Tick-Tock tried to keep the researchers distracted by asking them questions about their work and their theories about time. As he listened to their explanations, Tick-Tock began to understand what was really happening. The researchers weren't just studying time, they were time bandits from another dimension, where time flowed differently than it did in the normal world. They had discovered how to travel between dimensions and were systematically disrupting time flow in various regions, collecting temporal energy for their own purposes. "You're not really researchers, are you?" said Tick-Tock suddenly. "You're stealing time energy to take back to your own dimension." Temperus's friendly mask slipped, and her expression became cold and calculating. "Clever boy," she said. "Yes, our home dimension is running out of temporal energy. Time has nearly stopped flowing there, and we need to harvest it from other places to keep our world alive." "But that doesn't give you the right to steal it from here," protested Tick-Tock. "You're destroying the time flow for thousands of people just to save your own dimension." "Sometimes sacrifices must be made," said Flux matter-of-factly. "And besides," added Drift, "chaos can be quite beautiful in its own way." Just then, Kronos returned, carrying a small crystal in his talons that pulsed with brilliant white light. The Master Time Crystal was one of the most powerful temporal artifacts in existence, capable of stabilizing time flow across vast areas. "Perfect timing," said Tick-Tock, taking the crystal from his friend. "Now, let's fix this problem." But as soon as Temperus saw the Master Time Crystal, her eyes flared with hungry light. "That's exactly what we need," she said. "A crystal that powerful could provide enough temporal energy to save our entire dimension." The three time bandits suddenly revealed their true nature. Their shimmering clothes transformed into armor made from crystallized time, and they pulled out weapons that crackled with temporal energy, devices that could speed up or slow down anything they touched. "Hand over the crystal, young Timekeeper," demanded Temperus, "and we might let you keep enough time flow in your valley for people to survive." "Never," said Tick-Tock, clutching the Master Time Crystal protectively. "This crystal belongs here, and I won't let you destroy our time flow to save yourselves." What followed was the strangest battle anyone could imagine. The Time Bandits fired their temporal weapons, creating pockets where time moved at different speeds. Tick-Tock had to dodge areas where time was frozen completely, leap over spots where time was moving so fast it created whirlwinds of acceleration, and duck around zones where time was flowing backwards. Kronos proved to be invaluable in the fight, using his ability to see into the immediate future to warn Tick-Tock about attacks before they happened. "Duck left, slow zone incoming," he would call, or "Jump now, time freeze in 3 seconds." Meanwhile, Tick-Tock used his knowledge of temporal mechanics to turn the bandits' own weapons against them. He discovered that the time springs themselves could be used as amplifiers, redirecting the temporal energy from the bandits' weapons back at them. The battle raged around the springs for what felt like hours, though with all the time distortion happening, it was impossible to tell how long it actually lasted. Finally, Tick-Tock saw his chance. While the three bandits were coordinating an attack, he activated the Master Time Crystal and plunged it directly into the largest of the time springs. The effect was immediate and spectacular. A wave of perfectly synchronized temporal energy erupted from the spring, washing over the entire area and sweeping away all the chaotic time distortions the bandits had created. Their weapons overloaded and shattered, their armor cracked and fell away, and they found themselves trapped in a bubble of normal time flow. "It's over," said Tick-Tock, breathing heavily from the exertion of the battle. "The temporal energy you stole is flowing back into the springs, and your equipment is destroyed. You can't cause any more damage here." Temperus looked around at the restored springs, where clear water was once again bubbling peacefully, and temporal energy was flowing in steady, natural currents. "You don't understand," she said desperately. "Without this energy, our dimension will die. Everyone we know and love will be trapped in frozen time forever." Tick-Tock felt a pang of sympathy, but he also knew his duty. "I'm sorry about your dimension," he said, "but stealing time from other places isn't the answer. There has to be another way to solve your problem." Kronos, who had been listening thoughtfully, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, there might be," he said. "Tick-Tock, what if we help them create their own temporal generation system? Instead of stealing time from the other dimensions, they could learn to create their own sustainable time flow." "Is that possible?" asked Drift, his eyes focusing clearly for the first time since they had arrived. "It would be difficult," said Tick-Tock slowly, thinking through the temporal mechanics involved. "But yes, I think it could be done. You would need to build a great clock of your own, powered by the natural temporal rhythms of your dimension. It wouldn't provide as much energy as stealing from other places, but it would be sustainable and wouldn't harm anyone else. And," added Kronos, "I could help design it. Time Ravens have knowledge of temporal engineering that goes back thousands of years." For the first time since the battle began, Temperus looked hopeful. "You would really help us, even after we tried to steal from your dimension?" "Everyone deserves to have time flow properly in their world," said Tick-Tock, "but not at the expense of other people's time. If we can find a way for your dimension to generate its own temporal energy, that would be better for everyone." They spent the day working together to design a plan for a temporal generation system that could be built in the bandits' home dimension. It would require a lot of work and cooperation, but it would ultimately provide a sustainable solution that wouldn't require stealing time from other places. As evening approached and the time bandits prepared to return to their dimension with the plans for their new temporal system, Temperus approached Tick-Tock one last time. "Thank you," she said, and this time her smile was genuine. "We had become so desperate to save our world that we forgot there might be other solutions. You've reminded us that the best answers are often the ones that help everyone, not just ourselves." "Time is meant to be shared," said Tick-Tock. "When it flows properly, it benefits everyone." After the time bandits departed through a shimmering portal back to their dimension, Tick-Tock and Kronos made their way back up the mountain to the tower. The time springs were flowing normally again, and the temporal energy was radiating out into the valley in steady, healthy pulses. When they reached the great clock, Tick-Tock was delighted to hear the steady, rhythmic ticking that indicated everything was working perfectly. The crystal gears were turning smoothly, the temporal energy was flowing correctly, and time was once again synchronized throughout the region. "Another successful mission," said Kronos, preening his feathers with satisfaction. "Though I have to admit that was one of the stranger problems we've had to solve." "The best part," said Tick-Tock as he wound the great clock for the evening, is that we found a solution that helped everybody. The Time Bandits get to save their dimension, we get to keep our time flow stable, and nobody has to suffer." As the stars came out above the mountain tower, Tick-Tock looked out over the valley below. He could see stars beginning to twinkle in the villages as families settled in for the evening. Children were being tucked into bed right on schedule, and night workers were beginning their shifts at exactly the right time. Time was flowing smoothly and peacefully throughout the region, just as it should be. And somewhere in another dimension, 3 former Time Bandits were working hard to build their own great clock, learning that the most satisfying solutions are always the ones that create harmony rather than chaos. In his tower room, surrounded by the gentle ticking of hundreds of timepieces, Tick-Tock fell asleep to the rhythm of the great clock, knowing that he had done his job well and that time would flow sweetly through the dreams of everyone in the valley below. The end. The Bridge-Keeper's Secret. Read by Chuck Brown. In a peaceful countryside where rolling green hills met crystal-clear streams, there stood the most remarkable bridge anyone had ever seen. It wasn't made of stone or wood or metal like ordinary bridges. Instead, it appeared to be woven from morning mist and starlight, with railings that sparkled like captured dewdrops, and a surface that felt solid under your feet but looked as if you could see right through it to the water below. This magical bridge was tended by a young girl named River, who had the most unusual job in the entire kingdom. She was the Bridge Keeper, which meant she was responsible for helping the bridge decide who could cross and who needed to wait for a better time. River was 9 years old, with long dark hair that seemed to flow like water when she moved, and eyes the color of deep forest pools that reflected everything around them. River lived in a small cottage built right into one end of the bridge, with windows that looked out over the stream on one side and the meadows on the other. Her cottage was cozy and warm, filled with comfortable furniture and shelves lined with books about bridge keeping, water magic, and the ancient art of helping people find their way across difficult passages in life. The bridge was no ordinary crossing. It was a wishing bridge, which meant that it could only be crossed by people who truly needed to get to the other side for important reasons. The bridge itself was alive and intelligent, and it could sense whether someone was crossing for good reasons or selfish ones, whether they would use their journey to help others or only themselves. River's job was to talk to people who wanted to cross the bridge, help them understand what they were really looking for, and guide them in making choices that would be good for everyone. Sometimes people thought they wanted to cross for one reason, but the bridge could sense that they actually needed something completely different. River wasn't alone in her work. She shared the bridge with a wise old turtle named Current, who had been the bridge keeper before her and now served as her advisor and friend. Current was ancient and moved very slowly, but his mind was sharp, and he understood the mysteries of the bridge better than anyone else in the world. Every morning, River would wake up before dawn and walk to the center of the bridge to greet the sunrise. As the first rays of light touched the magical structure, it would shimmer and sing a soft, welcoming song that could be heard throughout the valley. This was the bridge's way of announcing that it was ready to help people with their journeys for another day. On this particular morning, as autumn painted the leaves in shades of red and gold, River noticed something unusual as she performed her morning ritual. The bridge felt different under her feet, not quite as solid as usual, and the shimmer in its structure seemed dimmer than normal. "Current," she called out to the old turtle, who was sunning himself on a patch of warm stone near the cottage, "something's wrong with the bridge. Can you feel it?" Current opened one ancient eye and slowly turned his head toward the bridge's center. After a long moment of careful observation, he spoke in his deep, gravelly voice. "Yes, child, the bridge is troubled. Its magic is weakening, and I think I know why." "What is it?" asked River, concerned. The bridge was not just her responsibility. It was essential for the entire region. People came from miles away to cross the Wishing Bridge when they needed help making important life decisions or finding their true path. "The bridge draws its power from the faith and good intentions of the people who cross it," explained Current. "But lately I've sensed that fewer people are crossing with pure hearts. Too many are trying to use the bridge for selfish purposes, and that's draining its magic." River thought about this as she looked out over the countryside. The bridge had always been a place where people came when they needed genuine help. Farmers seeking new land to feed their families, young people looking for their calling in life, travelers searching for lost loved ones. But recently, she had noticed more visitors who seemed to want the bridge to grant them wealth or power or fame, rather than helping them find what they truly needed. "What can we do?" asked River. "We can't force people to have good intentions." "No," agreed Current, "but we can help them discover what their true intentions really are. Sometimes people think they want one thing when they actually need something completely different. The bridge needs us to help visitors understand their own hearts before they attempt to cross." Just then they heard the sound of approaching footsteps on the path that led to the bridge. A well-dressed man was walking toward them, carrying a large bag and looking around with calculating eyes. River and Current exchanged glances. This visitor didn't feel like someone who was coming to the bridge for the right reasons. "Good morning," called the man as he reached the bridge's entrance. "I'm Merchant Goldenbag, and I've come to use your famous Wishing Bridge. I've heard that it can help people find exactly what they're looking for." River stepped forward politely. "Good morning, Merchant Goldenbag. I'm River, the bridge keeper. Before anyone can cross our bridge, I like to talk with them about their journey. Could you tell me what you're hoping to find on the other side?" Merchant Goldenbag smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I'm looking for the legendary Golden Valley that's supposed to be somewhere beyond this bridge. I've heard it's full of precious metals and gems just waiting to be collected. I plan to gather as much treasure as I can carry and become the richest man in the kingdom." River felt the bridge shudder slightly beneath her feet, a sure sign that it was not pleased with this visitor's intentions. "I see," she said carefully. "And what would you do with all that treasure once you've found it?" "Keep it, of course," laughed Merchant Goldenbag. "I'd build myself a mansion and buy servants and live in luxury for the rest of my life. Maybe I'd buy a title from the king and become a lord." Current slowly approached the conversation, his ancient eyes studying the merchant carefully. "And what about the people in your hometown? Would you share any of your newfound wealth with them?" Merchant Goldenbag looked surprised by the question. "Why would I do that? They haven't done anything to earn it. Besides, if everyone had treasure, then being rich wouldn't be special anymore." River could feel the bridge's magic dimming even more as Merchant Goldenbag spoke. His selfish intentions were actually hurting the bridge's ability to help anyone. She knew she had to find a way to help him understand what he really needed, rather than what he thought he wanted. "Merchant Goldenbag," she said gently, "may I ask you something? What made you decide to seek treasure in the first place? Was there something specific you were hoping to accomplish?" For the first time, the merchant's confident expression wavered slightly. "Well," he said slowly, "I suppose it started when my business began failing. I used to have a successful shop in town, and people respected me. But then, larger merchants moved in with cheaper goods, and I lost most of my customers. I felt forgotten, unimportant." "Ah," said Current wisely, "so you're not really looking for treasure at all. You're looking for respect and recognition." That's not..." Merchant Goldenbag started to protest, but then he stopped and thought about it. I suppose that might be true. I used to feel proud of my work and my place in the community. Now I feel like nobody notices me or values what I have to offer." River smiled encouragingly. "The Wishing Bridge is very good at helping people find what they truly need, but it sounds like what you need isn't treasure. It's a way to feel valued and respected again. There might be a much better solution than trying to find a legendary Golden Valley." "What do you mean?" asked Merchant Goldenbag, looking confused but also curious. "Well," said River, "what if we helped you find a way to rebuild your business and your reputation? What if you could become respected, not because you were rich, but because you provided something valuable to your community?" Current nodded approvingly. "The bridge has helped many people find new purposes for their lives. Perhaps it could help you discover a different kind of success, one based on helping others rather than just accumulating wealth." Merchant Goldenbag was quiet for a long moment, considering this possibility. As he thought, River could feel the bridge's magic growing slightly stronger. When people began to consider helping others instead of just themselves, the bridge always responded positively. I think I'd like that," said Merchant Goldenbag slowly. "But I don't know how to start over. My old business is gone, and I don't have much money left to begin again." "That's exactly the kind of problem the bridge loves to help with," said River with a smile. "But first, you need to make a choice. Do you want to cross the bridge looking for treasure to make yourself rich? Or do you want to cross looking for a way to serve your community and rebuild your life through helping others?" "I want to help," said Merchant Goldenbag, and River could tell that he meant it. "I want to find a way to be useful and respected again, not just wealthy." The moment he spoke those words, the bridge began to glow more brightly. The magical structure shimmered with renewed energy, and a gentle, welcoming song filled the air. The bridge was happy to help someone who wanted to use their journey for good. "Wonderful," said River. "Now you can cross safely. But remember, the bridge will take you where you need to go, not necessarily where you expect to go. Trust in its wisdom, and you'll find exactly what you need." Merchant Goldenbag stepped onto the bridge, and immediately his expression changed to one of wonder. As he walked across the shimmering surface, River could see scenes appearing in the mist around him, visions of the possibilities that awaited him on the other side. When he reached the far end of the bridge and disappeared into the morning mist, Current turned to River with approval. "Well done, child. You helped him discover his true heart, and the bridge's magic grew stronger because of it." But their work was far from over. Throughout the day, more visitors arrived at the bridge, each with their own reasons for wanting to cross. There was a young woman who thought she wanted to find a prince to marry, but River helped her realize she was actually looking for adventure and independence. There was an old man who believed he needed to find a magical cure for his loneliness, but who discovered through talking with Current that what he really needed was to reconnect with the community he had been avoiding. Each time River and Current helped someone understand their true intentions, the bridge grew stronger and more beautiful. By evening, it was glowing with renewed magic, and its song was clearer and more joyful than it had been in weeks. As the sun set and the day's work came to an end, River and Current sat together on the bridge, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "I think I understand something now," said River thoughtfully. "The bridge doesn't just help people cross from one side to the other, it helps them cross from who they think they are to who they really are inside." "Exactly," said Current with a proud smile. "And that's why your job as bridge keeper is so important. You don't just maintain a magical crossing, you help people discover their true selves and find their real purpose in life." A few days later, they received wonderful news. Merchant Goldenbag had found his new calling on the other side of the bridge. Instead of discovering treasure, he had found a small village that desperately needed someone with his business skills to help organize their market and trade system. He had become not just successful, but truly respected and valued for the help he provided to others. The young woman had indeed found adventure, becoming a traveling teacher who brought education to remote villages. The old man had discovered a group of fellow craftspeople who welcomed him into their community and appreciated his skills and wisdom. Each success story made the bridge stronger and more beautiful. Word spread throughout the region that the Wishing Bridge was not just a magical crossing, but a place where people could find their true purpose and calling in life. River realized that being a bridge keeper was about much more than maintaining a magical structure. It was about helping people understand themselves, encouraging them to think beyond their immediate wants to discover their deeper needs, and guiding them toward choices that would benefit not just themselves, but their entire community. As autumn deepened and the first snow began to fall, River and Current continued their important work. Each day brought new visitors, each with their own story and their own journey to make. And each day, River grew more skilled at helping people discover the difference between what they thought they wanted and what they truly needed. The bridge thrived under their care, glowing brighter with each act of selflessness and growing stronger with each person who chose to use their journey to help others. It became a beacon of hope and wisdom in the countryside, drawing people from far and wide who were seeking not just to cross a river, but to cross over into a better understanding of themselves and their place in the world. And every evening, as River and Current watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, they felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing they were not just doing a job, but fulfilling a calling. They were helping people find their way not just across a bridge, but across the most important journey of all, the journey to discovering who they truly were and what they were meant to contribute to the world. But their most challenging test was yet to come. One crisp winter morning, when frost painted delicate patterns on the cottage windows and the stream below the bridge sparkled with thin ice along its edges, River woke to find something very unusual. The bridge was completely dark, not glowing with its usual warm light, and eerily silent instead of humming with its gentle morning song. "Current," she called, running outside in her nightgown and slippers. "Something's terribly wrong with the bridge." The old turtle emerged slowly from his winter shelter, blinking in concern. As soon as he saw the darkened bridge, his expression grew grave. "This is serious, child. I've only seen the bridge go completely dark once before, many years ago when I was still learning to be a bridge keeper myself." "What does it mean?" asked River, shivering both from the cold and from worry. "It means the bridge has encountered something it cannot understand or help with," Current explained. "Someone is approaching who presents a challenge so difficult that the bridge has withdrawn its magic to protect itself." As if summoned by their conversation, they heard footsteps approaching on the path. But these weren't ordinary footsteps. They had a strange echoing quality, as if the person walking was somehow not entirely present in the world. The figure that emerged from the morning mist was unlike any visitor they had ever received. It appeared to be a young boy, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, but there was something translucent about him, as if he was made of moonlight and shadow rather than flesh and blood. His clothes seemed to be woven from twilight, and his eyes held a sadness so deep it made River's heart ache just to look at him. "Hello," said the boy in a voice that sounded like a wind through empty halls. "My name is Echo. I've been traveling for a very long time, and I need to cross your bridge." River exchanged a worried glance with Current. She had never encountered a spirit before, but that's clearly what Echo was. And spirits presented unique challenges for bridge keepers, because their needs and motivations were often completely different from those of living people. "Hello, Echo," said River, trying to keep her voice calm and welcoming despite her nervousness. "I'm River, and this is Current. We're the bridge keepers here. Before anyone can cross our bridge, we like to understand what they're looking for. Could you tell us about your journey?" Echo's translucent form flickered slightly, like a candle flame in a gentle breeze. "I've been lost for so long," he said sadly. "I died many years ago, but I never found my way to wherever spirits are supposed to go. I've been wandering the world, searching for something, but I don't know what. I heard that your bridge helps people find what they need, so I came here hoping it might help me find my way home." Current moved closer, his ancient eyes studying Echo with deep compassion. "How long have you been wandering, young spirit?" "I don't know," Echo replied, his voice becoming even more distant. "Time feels different when you're not alive. It could be decades or centuries. I remember being a boy, and I remember feeling very sad about something, but I can't remember what. And I can't remember how I died, or why I never moved on like other spirits do." River felt her heart breaking for the lost spirit. She had helped many people find their way, but she had no experience with helping someone who was already dead find their final rest. And clearly, the bridge was as uncertain as she was about how to help. "Echo," she said gently, "what do you remember about being alive? Anything at all might help us understand what's keeping you here." Echo closed his eyes, or where his eyes should have been, in his translucent face, and concentrated. I remember being very angry about something, and very sad. There was someone I loved very much, and something terrible happened to them. I think I was supposed to help them, but I failed, and maybe that's why I can't rest." "Unfinished business," murmured Current knowingly. "That's often what keeps spirits bound to the world of the living. Echo, do you remember who this person was that you loved?" "My sister," Echo said suddenly, his form brightening slightly as the memory surfaced. "Her name was Aria. She was younger than me, and she was sick, very sick. Our parents had died, and it was just the two of us. I was supposed to take care of her, but I couldn't find help. I couldn't save her." River began to understand. "And you think that's why you've been wandering? Because you feel guilty about not being able to help your sister?" "Yes," Echo whispered. "I failed her. I was her big brother, and I was supposed to protect her, but I couldn't. Maybe if I had been braver, or smarter, or tried harder, I could have found a way to help her get better." Current and River looked at each other with growing understanding. This wasn't just about helping a spirit find his way to the afterlife. It was about helping him forgive himself for something that had never been his fault to begin with. Echo, said Current gently. How old were you when your sister was sick?
I was 11, Echo replied. Arya was 8.
And you were both alone, with no parents or other family to help?
Yes, we lived on the streets. I tried to find work, tried to earn money for medicine, but no one would hire a child, and the doctors wouldn't see Arya without payment.
River felt tears forming in her eyes.
Oh, Echo, you were just a child yourself. You did everything you could. It wasn't your fault that you couldn't save her. But I was her big brother, Echo protested, his form flickering with emotion. I was supposed to take care of her.
You did take care of her, said Current firmly. You loved her. You stayed with her. You tried everything a young boy could possibly try. Sometimes, no matter how much we love someone, there are things beyond our power to fix. That doesn't make us failures. That makes us human. For the first time since Echo had arrived, the bridge began to emit a very faint glow. It was responding to the compassion and truth in Current's words.
But if it wasn't my fault, Echo said, confusion evident in his voice, then why have I been lost for so long? Why couldn't I move on?
River had an inspiration. Maybe it's not about fault at all. Maybe you've been wandering because you never got to say goodbye to Arya properly. Maybe you need to find her, not to apologize, but to make sure she's okay.
Is that possible?
Echo asked, hope flickering in his translucent form.
Could I find her in the spirit world?
I think, said Current slowly, that's exactly what the bridge is meant to help you do. But first, you need to forgive yourself. You need to understand that you were a good brother who did everything he could with the resources of a child. Your love for Arya was real, and that's what matters. Echo was quiet for a long time, and during that silence the bridge's glow grew steadily brighter. It was responding to the healing that was beginning to take place in the young spirit's heart.
I think I can feel her, Echo said suddenly, wonder creeping into his voice. I think she's been waiting for me somewhere beyond the bridge. But she's not angry with me. She's proud of me for trying so hard to help her.
The bridge burst into brilliant light, brighter than River had ever seen it. The magical structure was not just glowing. Now, it was singing, a melody so beautiful and pure that it seemed to come from the very heart of love itself.
She forgives me, Echo whispered, tears of light streaming down his translucent cheeks. She says I was the best big brother she could have asked for, and she's been waiting to tell me that it's okay to let go now.
As Echo stepped onto the bridge, his form began to solidify and brighten. With each step he took toward the other side, he became more real, more present, more at peace. The burden of guilt and self-blame that had kept him trapped between worlds was finally lifting. When he reached the center of the bridge, Echo turned back to wave at River and Current. But he was no longer the sad, translucent spirit who had arrived that morning. He looked like a real boy again, healthy and happy and free.
"Thank you," he called to them, his voice now clear and joyful instead of hollow and echoing. "Thank you for helping me remember that love is more important than perfection." And then he continued across the bridge, walking toward a brilliant light that had appeared on the other side. River could just make out another figure in that light,
a young girl who was running toward Echo with arms outstretched. When Echo reached Aria, they embraced, and both figures dissolved into pure radiant light that rose up into the sky and disappeared among the stars. The bridge continued to glow with peaceful, satisfied light for the rest of the day, with the knowledge that it had helped facilitate one of the most important crossings of all, the journey from guilt to forgiveness, from self-blame to self-acceptance, and from separation to reunion. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed," said River, wiping tears from her eyes. "And one of the most important lessons about being a bridge keeper," added Current. "Sometimes our job isn't just to help people cross from one side of a river to the other. Sometimes it's to help them cross from pain to healing, from fear to love, or from being lost to being found." As winter deepened and turned to spring, River and Current continued their work with renewed understanding of the bridge's true purpose. They helped farmers find new ways to work together when drought threatened their crops. They assisted young people in discovering careers that would let them serve their communities. They guided families through difficult times and helped them find ways to support each other. But they also began to encounter more visitors like Echo, people who were lost not in the physical world, but in emotional or spiritual ways. There was a woman who had been carrying guilt about a mistake she'd made 20 years earlier. There was a man who had never forgiven himself for not being able to prevent his father's illness. There was a child who blamed herself for her parents' divorce. In each case, River learned to look beyond the surface request and help people discover what they really needed. Often, what they needed most was permission to forgive themselves, or help in understanding that they were worthy of love despite their imperfections. The bridge thrived under this expanded understanding of its purpose. It became known throughout the land not just as a place where people could cross a stream, but as a place where they could cross over from whatever was holding them back to a new understanding of themselves and their place in the world. River realized that being a bridge keeper had taught her something profound about the nature of helping others. It wasn't about having all the answers or being able to fix every problem. It was about listening with compassion, asking the right questions, and helping people discover their own strength and wisdom. Years passed, and River grew from a young girl into a wise young woman. Current eventually reached the end of his very long life, but not before training River to carry on the work alone. Before he died, he told her that she had become the finest bridge keeper he had ever known, not because she was perfect, but because she truly understands that everyone deserves compassion and a chance to find their way home to themselves. In her cozy cottage built into the bridge, River would fall asleep each night to the gentle song of the magical structure, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to help people find their way. And in her dreams, she would see all the people who had crossed the bridge, the living and the dead, the young and the old, the confident and the lost, all of them finding peace and purpose because they had discovered that they were worthy of love and forgiveness. The wishing bridge continued to span not just the physical stream that flowed beneath it, but the distance between despair and hope, between self-doubt and self-acceptance, and between being lost and being found. And River, the bridge keeper, had learned that the most important crossing of all was the one that led people home to their own hearts, where they could finally forgive themselves and discover that they had always been worthy of love. The end. Selections from Aesop's Fables, read by Chuck Brown. The Hare and the Tortoise. A hare was making fun of the tortoise one day for being so slow. "Do you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with the tortoise, but for the fun of the thing, he agreed. So the fox, who had consented to act as a judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he lay down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and after a time passed the place where the hare was sleeping. But the hare slept on very peacefully, and when at last he did wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. The moral of the story? The race is not always to the swift. The end. The Lion and the Mouse. A lion lay asleep in the forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her fright and haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. Roused from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tiny creature to kill her. "Spare me," begged the poor mouse. "Please, please let me go, and someday I will surely repay you." The lion was much amused to think that a mouse could ever help him, but he was generous and finally let the mouse go. Some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was caught in the toils of a hunter's net. Unable to free himself, he filled the forest with his angry roaring. The mouse knew the voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she gnawed it until it parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you see that even a mouse can help a lion." The moral of the story? A kindness is never wasted. The end. The Ants and the Grasshopper. One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drying out the grain they had stored up during the summer, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored anything away for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it, the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance!" And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. The moral of the story? There's a time for work and a time for play. The end. The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way. So he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And off he walked very, very scornfully. The moral of the story? There are many who pretend to despise and belittle that which is beyond their reach. The end. The Shepherd Boy and the Wolf. A shepherd boy tended his master's sheep near a dark forest not far from the village. Soon he found life in the pasture very dull. All he could do to amuse himself was to talk to his dog or play on his shepherd's pipe. One day, as he sat watching the sheep and the quiet forest and thinking what he would do should he see a wolf, he thought of a plan to amuse himself. His master had told him to call for help should a wolf attack the flock, and the villagers would drive it away. So now, though he had not seen anything that even looked like a wolf, he ran toward the village, shouting at the top of his voice, "Wolf! Wolf!" As he expected, the villagers who heard the cry dropped their work and ran in great excitement to the pasture. But when they got there, they found the boy doubled up with laughter at the trick he had played on them. A few days later, the shepherd boy again shouted, "Wolf! Wolf!" Again the villagers ran to help him, only to be laughed at again. Then one evening, as the sun was setting behind the forest and the shadows were creeping out over the pasture, a wolf really did spring from the underbrush and fall upon the sheep. In terror, the boy ran toward the village, shouting, "Wolf! Wolf!" But though the villagers heard the cry, they did not run to help him as they had before. "He cannot fool us again," they said. The wolf killed a great many of the boy's sheep and then slipped away into the forest. The moral of the story? Liars are not believed even when they speak the truth. The end. The Goose and the Golden Egg. There once was a countryman who possessed the most wonderful goose you can imagine. For every day when he visited the nest, the goose had laid a beautiful, glittering golden egg. The countryman took the eggs to market and soon began to get rich. But it was not long before he grew impatient with the goose because she gave him only a single golden egg a day. He was not getting rich fast enough. Then, one day, after he had finished counting his money, the idea came to him that he could get all the golden eggs at once by killing the goose and cutting it open. But when the deed was done, not a single golden egg did he find, and his precious goose was dead. The moral of the story? Those who have plenty want more, and so lose all they have. The end. The Fox and the Stork. The fox one day thought of a plan to amuse himself at the expense of the stork, at whose odd appearance he was always laughing. "You must come and dine with me today," he said to the stork, smiling to himself at the trick he was going to play. The stork gladly accepted the invitation and arrived in good time and with a very good appetite. For dinner, the fox served soup, but it was set out in a very shallow dish, and all the stork could do was to wet the very tip of his bill. Not a drop of soup could he get, but the fox lapped it up easily, and to increase the disappointment of the stork, made a great show of enjoyment. The hungry stork was much displeased at the trick, but he was a calm, even-tempered fellow, and saw no good in flying into a rage. Instead, not long afterward, he invited the fox to dine with him in turn. The fox arrived promptly at the time that had been set, and the stork served a fish dinner that had a very appetizing smell. But it was served in a tall jar with a very narrow neck. The stork could easily get at the food with his long bill, but all the fox could do was lick the outside of the jar and sniff at the delicious odor. And when the fox lost his temper, the stork said calmly, "Do not play tricks on your neighbors unless you can stand the same treatment yourself." The end. The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. A certain wolf could not get enough to eat because of the watchfulness of the shepherds. But one night he found a sheepskin that had been cast aside and forgotten. The next day, dressed in the skin, the wolf strolled into the pasture with the sheep. Soon a little lamb was following him about, and was quickly led away to slaughter. That evening the wolf entered the fold with the flock, but it happened that the shepherd took a fancy for mutton broth that very evening, and picking up a knife, went to the fold. There the first he laid hands on and killed was the wolf. The moral of the story? The evildoer often comes to harm through his own deceit. The end. The Frogs Who Wished for a King. The frogs were tired of governing themselves. They had so much freedom that it had spoiled them, and they did nothing but sit around croaking in a bored manner and wishing for a government that could entertain them with the pomp and display of royalty, and rule them in a way to make them know they were being ruled. No milk and water government for them, they declared. So they sent a petition to Jupiter asking for a king. Jupiter saw what simple and foolish creatures they were, but to keep them quiet and make them think they had a king, he threw down a huge log, which fell into the water with a great splash. The frogs hid themselves among the reeds and grasses, thinking the new king to be some fearful giant. But they soon discovered how tame and peaceable King Log was. In a short time, the younger frogs were using him for a diving platform, while the older frogs made him a meeting place, where they complained loudly to Jupiter about the government. To teach the frogs a lesson, the ruler of the gods now sent a crane to be the king of Frogland. The crane proved to be a very different sort of king from old King Log. He gobbled up the poor frogs right and left, and they soon saw what fools they had been. In mournful croaks they begged Jupiter to take away the cruel tyrant before they should all be destroyed. "How now?" cried Jupiter. "Are you not yet content? You have what you asked for, and so you have only yourselves to blame for your misfortunes." The moral of the story? Be sure you can better your condition before you seek to change. The end. The Crow and the Pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with a little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher until at last it was near enough so he could drink. The moral of the story? In a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. The end. The Fox and the Hedgehog. A fox, swimming across a river, was barely able to reach the bank, where he lay bruised and exhausted from his struggle with the swift current. Soon a swarm of blood-sucking flies settled on him, but he lay quietly, still too weak to run away from them. A hedgehog happened by. "Let me drive the flies away," he said kindly. "No, no," exclaimed the fox. "Do not disturb them. They have taken all they can hold. If you drive them away, another greedy swarm will come and take the little blood I have left." The moral of the story? Better to bear a lesser evil than to risk a greater in removing it. The end. The North Wind and the Sun. The North Wind and the Sun had a quarrel about which of them was the stronger. While they were disputing with much heat and bluster, a traveler passed along the road wrapped in a cloak. "Let us agree," said the Sun, "that he is the stronger who can strip that traveler of his cloak." "Very well," growled the North Wind, and at once he sent a cold, howling blast against the traveler. With the first gust of wind, the ends of the cloak whipped about the traveler's body. But he immediately wrapped it closely around him, and the harder the wind blew, the tighter he held it to him. The North Wind tore angrily at the cloak, but all his efforts were in vain. Then the sun began to shine. At first his beams were gentle, and in the pleasant warmth after the bitter cold of the North Wind, the traveler unfastened his cloak and let it hang loosely from his shoulders. The sun's rays grew warmer and warmer. The man took off his cap and mopped his brow. At last he became so heated that he pulled off his cloak, and to escape the blazing sunshine, threw himself down in the welcome shade of a tree by the roadside. And the moral of the story is, gentleness and kind persuasion win where force and bluster fail. The end. Belling the Cat. The mice once called a meeting to decide on a plan to free themselves of their enemy, the cat. At least they wished to find some way of knowing when she was coming, so they might have time to run away. Indeed, something had to be done, for they lived in such constant fear of her claws that they hardly dared stir from their dens by night or day. Many plans were discussed, but none of them was thought good enough. At last, a very young mouse got up and said, "I have a plan that seems very simple, but I know it will be successful. All we have to do is hang a bell about the cat's neck. When we hear the bell ringing, we will know immediately that our enemy is coming." All the mice were much surprised that they had not thought of such a plan before. But in the midst of the rejoicing over their good fortune, an old mouse arose and said, "I will say that the plan of the young mouse is very good. But let me ask one question. Who will bell the cat?" And the moral of the story is, it is one thing to say that something should be done, but quite a different matter to do it. The end. The Milkmaid and her Pail. A milkmaid had been out to milk the cows, and was returning from the field with the shining milk pail balanced nicely on her head. As she walked along, her pretty head was busy with plans for the days to come. "This good rich milk," she mused, "will give me plenty of cream to churn. The butter I make I will take to market, and with the money I get for it, I will buy a lot of eggs for hatching. How nice it will be when they are all hatched and the yard is full of fine young chicks. Then, when May Day comes, I will sell them, and with the money I'll buy a lovely new dress to wear to the fair. All the young men will look at me. They will come and try to make love to me, but I shall very quickly send them about their business." As she thought of how she would settle that matter, she tossed her head scornfully, and down fell the pail of milk to the ground. And all the milk flowed out, and with it vanished butter and eggs and chicks and new dress and all the milkmaid's pride. And the moral of the story is, do not count your chickens before they are hatched. The end. A gentle retelling of Hansel and Gretel, read by Chuck Brown. Once upon a time, in a cozy cottage at the edge of a great forest, there lived a kind woodcutter with his two beloved children, Hansel and Gretel. Hansel was 8 years old with sandy brown hair and eyes that sparkled with curiosity, while his sister Gretel was 7, with golden braids and a smile that could brighten even the gloomiest day. The family had been going through difficult times. The woodcutter's work had become scarce, and food was hard to come by. Their stepmother, who had married their father the year before, often worried about how they would manage to feed everyone through the coming winter. She was not a cruel woman, but worry had made her sharp-tongued and impatient, especially when it came to the children. One evening, as autumn painted the leaves in brilliant reds and golds, Hansel and Gretel overheard their stepmother talking to their father in hushed, worried tones. "We barely have enough food for 2 people, let alone 4, she was saying. "Perhaps it would be best if the children went to stay with your sister in the next village until times improve." "But the journey through the forest is long and difficult," their father replied sadly, "and my sister has troubles of her own. I cannot bear to send the children away." "Then what do you suggest?" asked their stepmother, her voice filled with frustration and fear. Hansel and Gretel looked at each other with concern. They had never seen their parents so worried, and they didn't want to be a burden to their family. "Don't worry, Gretel," whispered Hansel, taking his sister's hand. "If we have to go on a journey, we'll take care of each other, and we'll find a way to help father and stepmother too." The next morning, their stepmother announced that she and their father had decided the children should indeed go visit their aunt in the neighboring village. "It's only temporary," she assured them, though her eyes looked sad. "Just until your father can find more steady work." Their father packed them a small bundle of food, some fish, a bit of cheese, and a flask of water. "Stay on the main path through the forest," he instructed them carefully. "Don't wander off, and you should reach your aunt's village by evening." But Hansel had been thinking during the night, and he had come up with a plan. While everyone was busy with preparations, he quietly filled his pockets with small white pebbles from the garden path. "Why are you taking those stones?" asked Gretel as they set off into the forest. "So we can find our way back home when Father's troubles are over," explained Hansel. "I'll drop them along the path, and they'll show us the way." As they walked deeper into the forest, Hansel carefully dropped pebbles at regular intervals, making sure each one caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the woods. The forest was beautiful, filled with singing birds and gentle woodland creatures that watched them pass with curious but friendly eyes. They walked for hours, following the winding forest path. But as the day grew longer, Gretel began to feel tired and a little frightened by how deep into the woods they had traveled. "Hansel," she said, "I don't think we're going the right way.
This path seems to be leading us deeper into the forest instead of toward the village."
Hansel looked around and realized his sister was right. In their worry about leaving home, they had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and now they were on an unfamiliar path that seemed to wind endlessly through the trees.
"Don't worry," said Hansel, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We can follow my pebbles back to where we made the wrong turn, and then find the correct path."
But when they turned around to retrace their steps, they discovered something troubling. The white pebbles that Hansel had so carefully dropped were nowhere to be seen. Small woodland creatures, squirrels and chipmunks and birds, had apparently mistaken the pebbles for food or interesting treasures and had carried them all away.
"Now what do we do?" asked Gretel, trying not to cry.
"We keep walking," said Hansel bravely.
"The path has to lead somewhere, and maybe we'll find someone who can help us."
They shared some of their bread and cheese and continued walking as the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky. The forest around them was peaceful and lovely, but they couldn't help feeling worried about being lost so far from home. Just as the sun was setting and they were beginning to wonder where they would spend the night, they came around a bend in the path and saw the most amazing sight either of them had ever beheld. In a small clearing surrounded by flowering bushes and fruit trees, there stood a house unlike any house they had ever seen. The walls appeared to be made of gingerbread, with white icing for mortars between the sweet brown blocks. The roof was covered with what looked like chocolate shingles, and the windows were made of clear, sparkling sugar. Candy canes served as porch pillars, and the garden fence was made of twisted licorice.
"It's like something from a fairy tale," gasped Gretel.
"It smells wonderful," added Hansel, breathing in the sweet aromas of vanilla and cinnamon that drifted from the house. As they stood marveling at the incredible sight, their stomachs rumbled loudly. They had eaten very little that day, and the house looked absolutely delicious.
"Do you think anyone would mind if we broke off just a tiny piece?" asked Gretel. "We're so hungry, and there's so much of it."
"I suppose a small piece wouldn't hurt," agreed Hansel, "just enough to keep us going until we find help." They approached the house cautiously and broke off small pieces of gingerbread from a corner where it wouldn't be easily noticed. The gingerbread was the most delicious thing they had ever tasted, sweet and spicy and perfectly fresh.
My, what have we here?"
The children looked up, startled, to see an elderly woman emerging from the candy house. But instead of being angry about them eating pieces of her home, she was smiling kindly at them. The woman was quite old, with silver hair and a face lined with wrinkles that spoke of many years of smiling. She wore a colorful apron over her dress, and her eyes twinkled with warmth and mischief.
"Are you hungry, dear children?" she asked in a voice like honey. "You look like you've been traveling for a long time."
"We're lost," explained Gretel honestly.
"We were trying to find our aunt's village, but we took a wrong turn, and now we don't know where we are."
"And we're very sorry for eating part of your house," added Hansel politely. "We were just so hungry, and it smelled so wonderful." The old woman laughed, a sound like silver bells tinkling.
"Don't worry about that, dear boy. I have plenty more gingerbread where that came from. In fact, why don't you both come inside and have a proper meal? Then we can figure out how to get you home safely."
The inside of the candy house was even more amazing than the outside. The furniture was made of chocolate and marzipan. The fireplace was built from graham crackers, and the shelves were lined with jars of every kind of candy imaginable. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, filling the house with warmth and the scent of cinnamon. The old woman, who introduced herself as Dame Sweetberry, prepared the most wonderful meal for them. There was warm soup that tasted like birthday cake, sandwiches made with bread that was somehow both savory and slightly sweet, and fruits that had been magically enhanced to taste like different kinds of candy.
"This is incredible," said Gretel between bites. "How do you make everything taste so wonderful?"
Dame Sweetberry smiled mysteriously.
"It's a special kind of magic that comes from years of practice and a genuine love of making children happy," she explained. "I've been perfecting these recipes for decades."
As they ate, the children told Dame Sweetberry about their journey and how they had become lost in the forest. She listened with great interest and sympathy.
"It sounds like your family is going through a difficult time," she said thoughtfully. "And it also sounds like you're both very brave and caring children who don't want to be a burden to your parents."
"We just want to help," said Hansel, "but we don't know how."
"Well," said Dame Sweetberry, "as it happens, I could use some help myself. I'm getting too old to maintain this candy house all by myself, and I've been looking for assistance. Would you be interested in staying here for a while and helping me? I could teach you how to make magical sweets, and in return, you'd have a warm place to stay and all the food you could eat."
Hansel and Gretel looked at each other uncertainly. The offer was tempting. Dame Sweetberry seemed kind, the house was amazing, and they certainly wouldn't go hungry. But they missed their father terribly, and they worried about what was happening at home.
"It's very generous of you to offer," said Gretel politely, "but we really should try to get home to our father. He'll be worried about us."
"And he needs our help," added Hansel. "Even if we're just children, maybe we can find ways to make things easier for him." Dame Sweetberry's expression softened with approval.
"You know," she said, "I think I might be able to help with that too. But first, why don't you stay here tonight and get a good rest? Tomorrow we'll see about getting you home and perhaps solving some of your family's problems as well."
She showed them to a cozy bedroom with beds made of soft marshmallow and blankets that smelled like vanilla. The children were so tired from their long day of walking that they fell asleep almost immediately, dreaming of candy houses and magical recipes. The next morning, Dame Sweetberry woke them with the smell of the most delicious breakfast they had ever encountered. There were pancakes that tasted like different fruits with every bite, eggs that were somehow both savory and sweet, and juice that sparkled like liquid sunshine. "Now then," said Dame Sweetberry as they finished eating, "I have a proposition for you. I've been thinking about your family's situation, and I believe I can help. But first, I need to teach you a few things about the magic of this house." She led them into a room they hadn't seen before, a workshop filled with candy-making equipment, recipe books, and jars of the most unusual ingredients imaginable. "This house," she explained, "doesn't just make ordinary candy. It creates sweets that can solve problems and help people. For instance, these cookies here can give someone energy to work longer and harder. These chocolates can help people think more clearly and come up with creative solutions to their troubles. And these special breads can keep a family fed for weeks with just a few loaves." She spent the morning teaching them how to make some of these magical treats, showing them which ingredients to use and how to infuse them with helpful properties. Hansel proved to have a natural talent for mixing and measuring, while Gretel had an intuitive understanding of how to add just the right amount of magic to each recipe. "You're both natural confectioners," said Dame Sweetberry with delight. "Now, here's what I propose. I'll teach you how to make a selection of these helpful treats, and you can take them home to your family. The special breads will ensure you don't go hungry. The energy cookies will help your father work more efficiently, and the problem-solving chocolates will help all of you think of new ways to improve your situation." "But that's too generous," protested Gretel. "We couldn't accept such valuable gifts." "Nonsense," said Dame Sweetberry firmly. The magic only works when it's given freely and with love. Besides, I have a feeling that once your family is back on their feet, you'll find ways to share this magic with others who need it." They spent the rest of the day learning to make the special treats. Dame Sweetberry also packed them a bag of regular travel food for their journey home, along with clear directions for finding the right path through the forest. "Now," she said as they prepared to leave, "I want you to remember something important. The real magic isn't in the candy or the recipes, it's in your willingness to help each other and your family. These treats will give you a boost, but it's your love and determination that will really solve your problems." She also gave them each a small candy compass that would always point toward home, so they would never get lost in the forest again. The journey back through the woods was much easier than their trip out had been. With the magical compass guiding them, they found the correct path and made good time. The forest seemed less intimidating now, and they even enjoyed watching the woodland creatures that followed them curiously, perhaps hoping for a taste of the wonderful-smelling treats they carried. When they finally emerged from the forest near their cottage, they could see their father sitting on the front steps with his head in his hands. He looked up at the sound of their footsteps, and his face lit up with joy and relief. "Hansel, Gretel!" he cried, running to embrace them. "We've been so worried. When you didn't reach your aunt's village, we didn't know what had happened to you." "We got lost," explained Hansel, "but we met someone wonderful who helped us." They told their father and stepmother the whole story of their adventure, showing them the magical treats Dame Sweetberry had taught them to make. At first, the adults were skeptical about the magic, but when they tasted the problem-solving chocolates, they immediately began thinking of creative solutions to their difficulties. "You know," said their father thoughtfully, "I've been thinking too narrowly about work. Instead of just cutting wood for other people, what if I used my skills to make furniture and household items? There's always a demand for well-made chairs and tables." "And I could help," added their stepmother, her earlier sharpness replaced by enthusiasm. "I know how to weave and sew. We could create a whole business together." The energy cookies gave them the stamina to work on their new plans, and the magical bread ensured they had plenty to eat while they got their new business established. Within a few weeks, word had spread about the high quality of their furniture and textiles, and orders began coming in from neighboring villages. But more importantly, the family had learned to work together and support each other. The children helped with simple tasks. Their stepmother discovered she had a talent for decorative carving, and their father found that he enjoyed the creative aspects of furniture making much more than simple wood cutting. As Dame Sweetberry had predicted, once their own situation improved, Hansel and Gretel began looking for ways to help others. They shared their magical recipes with families in need, always remembering Dame Sweetberry's lesson that the real magic came from giving freely and with love. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would walk to the edge of the forest and look toward the place where they knew the candy house stood hidden among the trees. They never saw Dame Sweetberry again, but they often found small gifts left at the forest's edge. New recipes written in her elegant handwriting, special ingredients for their magical baking, and always a note reminding them to use their gifts to help others. Years later, when they had grown up and started families of their own, Hansel and Gretel continued to make the magical treats, sharing them with anyone who needed help or hope. They told their own children the story of their adventure in the forest, and taught them that the most powerful magic of all was the willingness to help others, and the courage to keep trying, even when times seemed darkest. And they all lived happily ever after, surrounded by the sweet magic of kindness, generosity, and love. The end. The Windmill in the Fog. Read by Chuck Brown. Part 1. The Whispering Hill. In a small village by the sea, there was a hill that wore a crown of fog almost every day. The hill wasn't tall or grand, but it had a quiet way of drawing your eyes. People in the village called it Whispering Hill, because the wind there always seemed to be murmuring secrets, soft ones that curled around your ears and made you pause, as if listening to something just out of reach. At the top of the hill stood an old windmill. Its white sails stretched wide like the arms of a sleepy dancer, and its wooden body creaked in the wind. The windmill hadn't turned in many years, but no one had the heart to tear it down. It belonged to the hill, or perhaps the hill belonged to it. Some said the windmill was still alive. They said that on very foggy days, if you climbed the hill and stood perfectly still, you might hear the windmill speak. Not with words exactly, but in a hush of groans and whistles and sighs that felt almost like a voice. Children dared each other to go up and listen. Most ran back down giggling, with only cold toes and wild imaginations. But one girl came back quiet. Her name was Lissa. Lissa had soft brown hair and a curious mind. She liked questions better than answers, and spent more time watching clouds than talking. Her favorite thing in the world was the fog, how it wrapped around everything and made the familiar seem mysterious. One early morning, long before the sun rose, Lissa woke in her small attic bedroom. Something had nudged her from sleep. Not a noise, but a feeling, a hush, a kind of waiting in the air. She pulled on her coat, woolly socks, and boots, and tiptoed past her snoring cat. She didn't tell her parents, though she left a note. "Going to the hill. I'll be back for breakfast." Outside, the village was still. Not even the gulls had begun their calls. The only sound was the soft squish of her boots on damp grass as she walked through the meadow and up the slope toward the fog. It was thick that morning, so thick the hill looked like a giant pillow. As she climbed, the world disappeared behind her until all she could see was white and the faint outline of the windmill ahead. She reached the top, her breath clouding in front of her, and stood before the windmill. And then she heard it. Not creaking, not wind, a voice, gentle and low, like a breeze against glass. "You came," it said. Lissa blinked. She looked behind her. No one. The voice came again. Not from any direction, but from everywhere. "I've been waiting." Part 2. The Windmill Speaks. Lissa stepped closer. Her boots crunched softly on the frost-tipped grass. She placed a hand on the windmill's worn wooden door. "I'm Lissa," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "Are you really speaking?" "Yes," said the windmill. "I've spoken to many, but few stay here long enough to listen." Lissa leaned against the door. The wood was warm, strangely warm, despite the chill. "What are you?" she whispered. "A watcher," said the windmill, "a winder of fog, a keeper of the quiet things. Long ago, I turned with the breeze and whispered stories into the sails. Now I sit still and listen, but I still remember how to speak." Lissa felt as though her heart had turned into a feather, light and fluttering. "Why did you call me?" she asked. The windmill creaked softly, almost like a chuckle. "Because you asked questions when others only chased answers. Because your dreams are shaped like clouds, and your thoughts drift like birds. and because you might be the one to help me turn again." Lissa's eyebrows rose. "Turn? Like spin?" "Yes, but not just that. Turn the way a story turns, into something new." Lissa stood quietly, listening to the windmill's soft hum. It felt like standing inside a lullaby. "Will you come inside?" asked the windmill. She hesitated, then nodded. The wooden door creaked open, not pushed by her hand, but by the breath of the wind itself. Inside, the windmill was bigger than it should have been. The floor was smooth stone, set with little circles of glowing light. The air smelled like lavender and dust and something older than memory. Stairs curved upward along the wall, vanishing into shadows. In the center of the room stood a table made of driftwood and salt-polished glass. Atop it sat a small compass, turning slowly, though there was no breeze. Lissa stepped inside. "Close the door, gently," the windmill whispered. She did. At once, the fog outside became a soft glow through the walls. It felt like being inside a lantern made of mist. "I didn't know windmills had rooms like this," Lissa said. "Not all do," said the windmill. "Only the ones who've been forgotten long enough to remember their true selves." Lissa smiled. She liked that sentence very much, though she didn't fully understand it. The compass spun once, then stilled. A quiet hum pulsed through the floor, like the windmill was stretching in its sleep. "There's something I must show you," the voice said. "Something that lives in the turning of my sails. Will you climb?" Lissa nodded and walked toward the staircase. Part 3. The Room Above the Fog. The stairs wound upward in a gentle spiral, and with each step, Lissa felt a shift, like the air was changing around her, softening, thickening. The sounds of the world below faded entirely, until all she could hear was the beat of her own heart and the occasional breath of the windmill's voice. She passed windows shaped like leaves and feathers. Through them, the fog outside glowed pale blue and pink, like dawn was being painted in watercolor. Finally, she reached the top. It was a round room, small and strange. Instead of walls, there were moving pictures of the sky, clouds rolling, stars winking, winds dancing in slow spirals. The ceiling above was a great wooden wheel, the central hub of the windmill's sails, and beneath it was a round cushion where someone might sit and listen for hours. In the center of the room floated a glowing globe. It looked like a little world made of fog, with tiny shapes drifting through it, boats, birds, trees, even a sleeping cat. "This is what I remember," said the windmill. "Everything that passes through the fog, I keep a piece of it here. Not as it is now, but as it felt when it passed. Its weight, its whisper, its warmth. My memory is made of moments." Lissa stepped closer to the globe. It shimmered as she looked at it. A bird-shaped cloud formed and vanished. Then a lighthouse. Then a small girl running with a kite. She stared wide-eyed. "Can it show me anything?" "Only things that truly happened," said the windmill, "but often they are the parts people forget." Lissa placed a hand near the globe. A shape began to form. A kitchen, a table, a cat curled near a window. Her house. "You are in it now," said the windmill. "Your memories are part of mine." Part 4. The Song Beneath the Blades. Lissa sat cross-legged beneath the globe of fog and memory, her eyes fixed on the soft shapes swirling inside it. They moved slowly now. An old man fishing from a dock, a paper boat floating itself in mid-air, a lantern swinging from a child's hand. Every shape drifted through the mist like it belonged there. "Can anyone see this but me?" she asked softly. "Only those who are listening," the Windmill said, "which is why I called to you." Lissa leaned back slightly, resting her palms on the smooth floor. It felt almost like warm stone, almost like wood. She couldn't quite tell. "What happened to your sails?" she asked. "Why don't you turn any more?" The Windmill let out a long, low sigh. "The wind that once moved me has gone quiet," it said. "Not the wind outside, the true wind, the one made of wonder and of wishing. I used to turn because the world was full of those things, but now people rush, they forget. The wonder grows thin. I need help to gather it again." Lissa thought for a moment. "Is that why you asked me to climb the hill?" "Yes, I thought perhaps you might carry the spark of it still. You see the world as if it's waiting to be heard. That is rare." Lissa felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to praise, but there was something else stirring in her chest too, like a sleepy bird stretching its wings. "What do I need to do?" she asked. The globe above the floor began to glow more brightly. The swirling fog inside formed into a shape, a long twisting ribbon that shimmered like silk in the moonlight. "This is a thread of wonder," the Windmill said, "one of many. They are scattered across hills and fields, hidden in quiet places. I need them to turn again." "Where do I find them?" "You've already found the first, by climbing here, by listening. The rest are waiting, but not far. You need only walk with care, look with your heart, and gather what most pass by." Lissa stood, brushing the back of her legs. "Will I know them when I see them?" The Windmill creaked gently, like a nod. "Yes, they shimmer slightly in the corner of the eye. They might look like a feather or a forgotten toy or a puddle that reflects the stars. They are pieces of the world's wonder. You only need to hold them close and bring them back." Lissa nodded. Her heart beat steadily, not fast, not afraid, just certain. "I'll do it." The globe dimmed, and a small door opened in the far wall. It led to a narrow stair, winding back down through the fog. As she stepped through it, the Windmill's voice followed her. "Thank you, Lissa. Walk gently and watch the edges of things." Part 5. Gathering Wonder. The fog on the hill had begun to thin by the time Lissa reached the bottom. Pale sunlight filtered through, brushing gold across the wet grass. Dewdrops clung to every blade like tiny glass buttons. She had no map, no guide, just the thread of feeling in her chest, like following a half-remembered tune. The first shimmer appeared near the old well by the meadow. It was a scrap of music, hanging in the air like a glint of light. As Lissa stepped closer, she heard a note, clear and soft, like a flute. When she reached for it, it melted into her hand like a warm mist. A ribbon of silver light wrapped briefly around her fingers, then vanished. But she could feel it resting in her palm, weightless and true. She smiled. The second came near the orchard, an old apple tree with a swing tied to its branch. The swing moved even though there was no wind. As Lissa touched the rope, she felt a memory rise, not hers, but someone's, a child laughing, flying through the air, cheeks flushed with joy. Another shimmer joined her. And so it went. Near the pond, she found a pebble that glowed softly when held. On the back porch of a sleepy cottage, a kitten's purr echoed like a lullaby and became another thread. Each time she found one, it wove itself gently around her wrist like a bracelet of light. By the time the sky turned the color of ripe plums, she had gathered 7 shimmers. Her feet were damp, and her heart was full. She climbed the hill once more, stepping through the thin curtain of fog that still clung to the top like a veil. The windmill waited, quiet but expectant. "You have returned," it whispered. "I found them," Lissa said, holding out her hands. Tiny sparks of light danced around her wrists. Each shimmer lifted from her skin and floated toward the sails above, tucking themselves into the joints and beams. The windmill shuddered. Then, slowly, it turned. Part 6. When the blades turn. Slow at first, just a gentle sway, but then, as each shimmer nestled into place, the windmill's arms began to spin in a slow, steady circle, not forced by wind, but moved from within, like a heart remembering how to beat. Lissa stood still, eyes wide. She felt the air shift around her, warm and cool at once, like someone wrapping her in a blanket fresh from the sun. "You did it," whispered the windmill. "You helped me remember how to move." Lissa smiled and touched the wooden wall beside her, which no longer felt so still. It hummed with quiet energy. "Would you like to see what comes next?" the windmill asked. She nodded. The door opened again, not the one leading back down, but a round one she hadn't noticed before, set higher, behind the sails. It looked out over the valley, but from where she stood, the fog made everything beyond invisible. She climbed up and stepped through the door. Outside, she found a narrow balcony, and beyond it, nothing, only mist. Then the sails turned a little faster, and the mist began to pull away. It didn't vanish exactly. It folded, curled, peeled itself back like soft paper, revealing the lines beneath a drawing. And Lissa saw them, ribbons of light in the air, moving over the land like invisible trails. Some soared high, others dipped low, threading through trees, over rooftops, around chimneys and open windows. They were the paths of wind, not just air, but feeling, wonder, memory, joy. "These are the old paths," said the windmill, "where stories fly, where dreams are carried, where the breath of the world moves when no one notices." Lissa leaned over the railing, awestruck. She could see the lines stretching beyond her village, past hills and rivers, touching places she'd never seen, castles, forests, deserts, oceans. And every so often, drifting on those lines, were shapes. Clouds shaped like elephants, boats without sails, floating fish made of music. Lissa laughed out loud. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It always was," said the windmill, "but it takes a listener to see it." Part 7. The Final Thread. Lissa stayed until the sky turned gold and rose. The windmill kept turning gently, humming with new life. But as she turned to go, the windmill's voice returned, quieter than before. "There is one more thread," it said. Lissa paused. "Another shimmer?" "Not exactly. This one is already inside you, but it must be given freely." Lissa tilted her head. "What is it?" "Your story," the windmill said. "You've gathered wonder. Now you must pass it on. Let someone else see the hidden things. You must choose someone who listens the way you do." Lissa thought about it. She thought of her younger brother, who liked to build tiny villages out of stones and leaves. She thought of the librarian who always smiled when handing her a new book. She thought of her grandmother, who used to tell bedtime stories without needing a book at all. She smiled. "I think I know who." "Good," said the windmill. "Then I will rest, and I will wait." Lissa walked back down the stairs. The globe in the center of the windmill pulsed once, then faded to a soft glow. The door opened, and the morning was waiting. As she walked home, the fog parted gently ahead of her, as though recognizing her. The shimmer light still clung faintly to her fingertips, and the world felt a little softer, a little brighter than before. She reached her house just as the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden streaks across the window panes. Her cat blinked at her from the windowsill. On the table, her parents were just sitting down to breakfast. "Sleep well?" her mother asked with a smile. Lissa paused. Then she smiled too. "I had a dream," she said, slipping off her coat and sitting down, "about a windmill, a talking one, and fog that remembered things." Her father chuckled. "That sounds like a good one." Lissa looked out the window, where the hill still wore its soft crown of mist. She nodded. It was the best one. Part 8. The Sharing of the Thread. That evening, as the sun melted into the sea, Lissa stood barefoot in the grass behind her house. The air was warm, the breeze playful, and the sky above blushed in soft pinks and gentle golds. The fog had thinned, but hadn't gone. It lingered along the edges of the fields and hedges, like it didn't quite want to leave. Inside, dinner was finished. Dishes clinked in the sink, her father humming an old tune, her mother drying plates with the same worn towel they always used. It was all perfectly ordinary, and Lissa felt quietly changed. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out a tiny stone, not one of the shimmer threads, not glowing or magical, but one she'd picked up near the base of the windmill. It was smooth and cool, shaped almost like a teardrop. She'd held it the entire way down the hill, without thinking. "Lissa?" came a voice behind her. It was her little brother, Jory, holding a toy glider in one hand and a handful of dandelions in the other. His socks didn't match, and his nose was slightly smudged with jam. He gave her a curious look. "You okay?" She nodded and sat down on the grass. "Come here." He plopped down beside her, setting his things in his lap. "Did you go up the hill this morning? I saw your boots by the door when I woke up." "I did," she said softly. "I visited the windmill." "Again? Did it creak?" he asked. Lissa smiled faintly. "It talked." Jory tilted his head, curious but unconvinced. "You mean like talked?" She looked at him, really looked, at his wide brown eyes, the way he always listened with his whole face. She took a breath and nodded. "Yeah, it talked. It showed me a place where wind and stories live, and something else too." He waited, eyebrows lifted. She placed the smooth stone into his palm. "This is for you," she said. "It's not magic, not the kind that glows anyway, but it's part of something. And now it's yours." Jory turned the stone in his hand. "What am I supposed to do with it?" "Keep it until the next time the wind feels like it's saying something. Then go listen." He blinked, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when a young mind brushes against something big and doesn't quite know how to say so. "Okay," he said at last. They sat in the grass together, not talking, not needing to. Above them, a thin ribbon of fog drifted past the moon, trailing a glimmer behind it like the hem of a dream. Part 9. The Long Quiet Turning. days passed. The fog didn't disappear from the hilltop, but it shifted. It no longer clung like a curtain. It danced. It welcomed. Some days, people walking through the village would pause and glance up, thinking they'd seen a strange shape in the clouds. A fish, a feather, a kite, but only for a second. Lissa returned to the windmill often, though never quite the same way twice. Sometimes it greeted her with a soft hum, sometimes with silence. Sometimes it just opened its door and let her sit for a while. She never rushed, and the windmill never asked her to. Once she brought her grandmother, who hadn't climbed a hill in many years. They sat side by side on the platform, sipping tea from a thermos, watching fog wrap itself around the sails like a shawl. "I used to dream of places like this," her grandmother whispered. "They're still dreaming of you," Lissa replied. Later she brought Jory, who stood at the edge of the memory globe with wide eyes and said simply, "Oh." He didn't need to say more. The windmill understood. And Lissa? Lissa became a quiet gatherer of shimmer. Not every day, not even every week, just when the world whispered something worth keeping. A puddle that reflected stars, a forgotten note tucked into a library book, a giggle that escaped a child at just the right moment. She kept those threads close, and when the time felt right, she returned them to the sails. And the windmill turned, slowly, softly, always with care, just like a story being told again. Epilogue for the listener. Sometimes, if you visit the hill by the sea on a morning heavy with fog, you might hear a creak. You might think it's just the wind, or old wood, or your own imagination. But if you listen, really listen, you may hear more. You may feel a hush in your chest, and you might wonder where the stories go when no one remembers them. They don't go far. They turn slowly in the wind, waiting for someone like you. The end. The Constellation Keeper's Gift, read by Chuck Brown. High above the world, where the air was so thin it sparkled like diamond dust, and the night sky stretched endlessly in all directions, there lived a young girl named Astrid in the most extraordinary observatory anyone could imagine. The Observatory of Eternal Stars was built entirely from crystallized starlight, with walls that were transparent by day but glowed with soft silver light when darkness fell. It perched on the very peak of the tallest mountain in the world, so high that clouds drifted below it like a fluffy white carpet. Astrid was 10 years old, with hair the color of midnight that seemed to shimmer with tiny points of light, as if stars had gotten caught in the dark strands. Her eyes were deep blue, like the space between stars, and she wore a cloak made from fabric that looked like captured pieces of the night sky, complete with twinkling constellations that moved slowly across the dark material. Astrid had the most important job in the entire universe. She was a constellation keeper. Every night, it was her responsibility to make sure all the star patterns in the sky stayed in their proper places, told their stories correctly, and provided guidance to the people who looked up at them from the world far below. When constellations started to drift out of position or their stars began to dim, it was Astrid's job to fix them and restore their celestial magic. She wasn't alone in her work. Living in the observatory with her was an ancient star sprite named Cosmos, who had been helping to tend the constellations for thousands of years. Cosmos was no bigger than Astrid's hand, with skin that glowed like moonlight and wings that looked like they were made from captured aurora. He could fly faster than shooting stars and see things that were happening anywhere in the night sky. Every evening, as the sun set and the first stars began to appear, Astrid would climb the spiral staircase to the top of the observatory's highest tower. There, she kept the star map, a magnificent chart that showed the position of every constellation in the sky, along with notes about their stories, their purposes, and the special magic each one possessed. Tonight, as autumn painted the distant world below in shades of gold and crimson, Astrid noticed something troubling as she checked her star map. Several constellations were glowing much more dimly than they should, and their positions seemed to be drifting slowly out of alignment. "Cosmos," she called to her tiny companion, who was perched on the edge of the star map, his wings flickering with concern. "Look at this. Ursa Major has moved 3 degrees to the east. Cassiopeia is tilting at the wrong angle, and Orion's belt stars are so dim I can barely see them." The star sprite flew closer to examine the map, his glowing form casting tiny rainbows on the crystalline surface. "This is very troubling, Astrid," he said in his voice like wind chimes. "When constellations drift out of position, it affects their ability to provide guidance to travelers and dreamers below. And when their light dims, people lose hope and forget to wish on stars." Astrid frowned with worry. As Constellation Keeper, she had learned that the star patterns weren't just beautiful decorations in the sky. They served important purposes. Sailors used them for navigation. Farmers relied on them to know when to plant and harvest, and children everywhere made wishes on their light. If the constellations stopped working properly, it would affect people all over the world. "What could be causing this?" asked Astrid, studying the star map more closely. "I've been keeping all the constellations properly maintained, and there haven't been any cosmic storms or meteor showers that should have disrupted them." Cosmos flew in a small circle, thinking hard. "There's only one thing I can think of that would cause multiple constellations to lose their power at once," he said slowly. "Someone or something must be draining their starlight." Draining their starlight? Astrid had never heard of such a thing. But who would do that, and why? "I don't know," admitted Cosmos, "but we need to investigate quickly. If this continues, some constellations might fade away entirely, and once a star pattern is lost, it's almost impossible to restore." They spent the next hour using the observatory's special telescopes to examine each affected constellation. The telescopes were made from polished crystal and could see not just the visible light of stars, but also the magical energy that flowed between them. As they looked more closely, they began to notice something strange. "Look at this," said Astrid, adjusting the focus on her telescope. "There's some kind of dark stream flowing away from each of the dimming constellations. It's like something is siphoning their light away." Cosmos flew up to look through the telescope himself. "You're right, and all those dark streams seem to be flowing in the same direction. They're heading toward, oh my stars, they're heading toward the void." The void was a place at the very edge of the observable universe where no stars shone and no light could penetrate. It was said to be a realm of endless emptiness, and most starkeepers avoided even thinking about it, let alone looking in its direction. But what could be in the void that would want to steal starlight? Asked Astrid. Before Cosmos could answer, they heard a sound that made them both freeze with surprise. It was a voice, faint and distant, calling from somewhere among the stars themselves.
Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help.
Astrid and Cosmos looked at each other in amazement. In all their time as Constellation Keepers, they had never heard a voice calling from space itself. "Where is that coming from?" whispered Astrid. Cosmos flew to the largest telescope and began adjusting its settings to track the source of the voice. After a few moments, he called out excitedly, "I found her! Astrid, come look at this!" When Astrid peered through the telescope, she gasped in wonder. Floating in the darkness between constellations was a figure she had never seen before, a young girl who appeared to be about her own age, with hair that looked like it was made from cosmic dust, and a dress that sparkled with the light of distant galaxies. But unlike Astrid and Cosmos, who were filled with the warm light of stars, this girl seemed to be surrounded by a cold, empty darkness. "Help me, please," the girl called again, her voice carrying across the vast emptiness of space. "I don't know how to stop what's happening." Without hesitation, Astrid activated the observatory's most powerful magic, the Stellar Bridge. This was an ancient enchantment that could create a pathway of solid starlight between any 2 points in the universe. A shimmering bridge of silver light stretched out from the observatory toward the floating girl, and within minutes she was stepping through the crystalline walls of the star chamber. Up close, the girl was even more unusual than she had appeared through the telescope. She was indeed about Astrid's age, but instead of the warm, welcoming light that surrounded all Starkeepers, she seemed to absorb light rather than emit it. Her hair was dark as space itself, and her eyes were like black holes, not frightening, but infinitely deep and sad. "Thank you for helping me," said the girl, her voice trembling with emotion. "My name is Nova, and I think I'm the cause of all your problems." "What do you mean?" asked Astrid gently, offering Nova a chair made from crystallized comet tail. Nova sat down carefully, as if she was afraid she might break something. "I live in the void," she explained. "I was born there, in the emptiness between stars. For as long as I can remember, I've been surrounded by darkness and silence. I never knew there was anything else until recently, when I began to sense light coming from far away." "The light from our constellations," said Cosmos, understanding beginning to dawn in his starry eyes. "Yes," Nova said, tears that looked like liquid shadow running down her cheeks. "I was so lonely in the darkness, and when I felt that warm, beautiful light, I couldn't help myself. I reached out to touch it, to bring just a little bit of it back to the void with me. But I don't know how to control this power I have. Every time I try to touch the starlight, I end up pulling it toward me." Astrid felt her heart fill with compassion for the lonely girl. "You're not trying to steal the starlight," she said softly. "You're just trying not to be alone anymore." "But I'm destroying your constellations," Nova protested. "People down on the world below need their stars for guidance and hope, and I'm taking that away from them just because I'm selfish and lonely." "You're not selfish," said Astrid firmly. "You're just someone who's been alone for far too long. But maybe we can find a way to help you that doesn't hurt the constellations." Cosmos flew over to hover near Nova, his gentle light causing her dark hair to shimmer with tiny points of brightness. "Nova," he said quietly, "what if instead of taking light from the existing constellations, we helped you create new ones? Stars are born all the time throughout the universe.
What if we taught you how to gather that new starlight and make your own constellation patterns?" Nova's eyes widened with hope and wonder. "Is that possible? Could I really learn to make my own stars instead of taking yours?" "More than possible," said Astrid, warming to the idea. "In fact, I think you might be exactly what the universe has been waiting for. The void has been empty for so long, but maybe it's not meant to stay that way forever. Maybe it's meant to become a new part of the night sky, with its own constellations and its own stories." They spent the rest of the night teaching Nova how to work with cosmic forces in positive ways. Astrid showed her how to use the star map to track the birth of new stars throughout the universe. Cosmos taught her how to gather stardust and cosmic energy without disrupting existing star patterns. And together, they helped her understand how to channel her natural ability to attract light into the skill of constellation creation. Nova proved to be a remarkably quick learner. Her unique nature, born from emptiness and darkness, gave her an intuitive understanding of how to fill empty spaces with light and meaning. Within hours, she was creating beautiful new star patterns in the void, transforming the dark, empty space into a canvas for celestial art. "Look," she called excitedly as she worked, her voice now filled with joy instead of sadness. "I'm making a constellation that looks like a bridge connecting all the different parts of the sky." Astrid peered through her telescope and gasped with delight. Nova was indeed creating a magnificent new constellation, a bridge of stars that seemed to connect all the existing star patterns, creating pathways of light that stretched across previously empty regions of space. "It's beautiful," breathed Astrid. "And look, the light from your new stars is actually making all the other constellations brighter. Instead of draining their energy, you're adding to it." As Nova continued to work, creating constellation after constellation in the former void, something wonderful began to happen throughout the entire night sky. The existing constellations not only returned to their full brightness, but became even more beautiful and vibrant than they had ever been before. The new star patterns that Nova created seemed to energize and enhance all the others, creating a network of celestial light that was more magnificent than anything anyone had ever seen. "I think," said Cosmos, watching in amazement as the night sky transformed before their eyes, "that Nova was meant to be a constellation keeper too. The universe has been waiting for someone who could bring light to the empty places." "But I don't know all the stories and traditions that you know," said Nova, pausing in her star-weaving to look at Astrid with uncertainty. "How can I be a proper constellation keeper if I don't know the old ways?" Astrid smiled warmly at her new friend. "The old constellations have their stories, but your new ones need stories too. You can create new traditions, new myths, new ways for people to understand and connect with the stars. The universe is big enough for both ancient wisdom and new magic." As dawn approached and the night sky began to fade, the three friends stood together at the top of the observatory, looking out at the transformed heavens. Where once there had been a dark, empty void, there was now a glorious tapestry of new constellations that sparkled and danced with their own unique light. "I need to return to my realm," said Nova, though she no longer seemed sad about it. "But now it's not a void anymore. It's a place of light and beauty and endless possibilities." "And you won't be alone," added Astrid. "Cosmos and I will visit you often, and you can come here whenever you want. We're all constellation keepers now, working together to make the night sky more beautiful for everyone." Before Nova left, she created one final constellation, a pattern of stars that formed a perfect circle connecting the observatory to her new realm. "This is the friendship constellation," she explained. "No matter how far apart we are, we'll always be connected by these stars."
As Nova stepped back onto the stellar bridge to return to her transformed domain, she turned to wave goodbye. But instead of the sad, lonely girl who had floated in darkness just hours before, she now glowed with her own inner light. Not the warm light of ancient stars, but the bright, hopeful light of new beginnings. "Thank you," she called, as the bridge carried her home. "Thank you for teaching me that being different doesn't mean being alone, and that the best magic comes from helping each other shine." From that night forward, the sky was more beautiful than it had ever been. Children around the world looked up to see not just the familiar constellations they had always known, but exciting new patterns that sparked their imaginations and inspired new dreams. The bridge of stars that Nova had created became a favorite for making wishes, and many people reported that wishes made on the new constellations seemed to come true more often than those made on the old ones. Astrid continued her work as Constellation Keeper with renewed joy and purpose. She had learned that her job wasn't just about maintaining the existing stars, but about helping the universe grow and change in beautiful ways. And she had discovered that the best part of being a keeper of celestial magic was sharing that magic with others who needed it. Cosmos, wise as he was, had learned something too, that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone discover their own power rather than trying to solve their problems for them. Nova hadn't needed rescuing. She had needed understanding and guidance to transform her loneliness into something beautiful. And Nova, in her transformed realm that was no longer a void, but a garden of new stars, became the keeper of emerging light. She welcomed other lost souls who found themselves adrift in empty spaces, teaching them how to create their own constellations and find their own places in the vast, wonderful tapestry of the universe. Every night, as Astrid climbed to the top of her crystal observatory and looked out at the star-filled sky, she would smile at the sight of Nova's constellations dancing alongside the ancient patterns. The universe was bigger and more magical than it had ever been before, filled with both the wisdom of ages and the bright promise of new discoveries yet to come. And sometimes, when the night was particularly clear and still, she could hear Nova's laughter carried on the cosmic winds. No longer the lonely sound of someone calling for help, but the joyful sound of someone who had found her purpose and was sharing her light with all the universe. But their story was far from over. Several weeks after Nova had transformed the void into a garden of new stars, Astrid received an urgent message that arrived in the most unusual way. She was sitting in her study, updating the star map to include all of Nova's beautiful new constellations, when suddenly the crystal walls of the observatory began to shimmer with words written in starlight. "Astrid," the message read, "something wonderful is happening, but I need your help to understand it. Please come to the bridge constellation as soon as you can. Nova." Cosmos, who had been napping on a cushion made of crystallized comet dust, immediately perked up his tiny ears. "That's strange," he said, stretching his gossamer wings. "Nova has been doing so well on her own. What could she need help with now?" "Only one way to find out," said Astrid, activating the stellar bridge once again. The shimmering pathway of starlight stretched out from the observatory toward Nova's realm, and within moments they were traveling through space toward the constellation that had become the symbol of their friendship. When they arrived at Nova's domain, they found their friend floating among her new stars with an expression of wonder and slight confusion on her face. But she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were dozens of small, glowing figures that looked like tiny versions of herself, beings made of cosmic dust and starlight, each one no bigger than Cosmos.
Astrid! Cosmos! Nova called out joyfully when she saw them approaching. I'm so glad you're here. Look at this. I think I accidentally created new life. The small beings floating around Nova turned to look at the newcomers with curious, twinkling eyes. They appeared to be baby star sprites, similar to Cosmos, but younger and smaller, with wings that sparkled like newborn stars and voices like the tinkling of distant wind chimes. How did this happen? Asked Astrid in amazement, watching as the tiny creatures performed aerial dances around Nova's new constellations. I'm not entirely sure, Nova admitted, gently catching one of the star sprites in her cupped hands. I was working on a new constellation yesterday, one shaped like a tree with branches reaching out in all directions. I wanted it to represent growth and new possibilities, but when I had finished it, all these little ones started appearing around the stars, as if the constellation had somehow given birth to them. Cosmos flew closer to examine the baby star sprites, his ancient eyes wide with wonder. Remarkable, he breathed. In all my thousands of years, I've never seen anything like this. New star sprites are usually born from the collision of cosmic winds and ancient starlight, but these seem to have been born from pure creativity and love. One of the baby sprites, braver than the others, flew over to Cosmos and began chattering in a language of musical tones and light patterns. Cosmos listened carefully, then translated for the others. She says her name is Sparkle, and she wants to know if we're here to teach them how to be proper star sprites, he reported. They're all very excited about learning to help with constellation keeping. But I don't know how to teach them, said Nova worriedly. I'm still learning myself. What if I do something wrong and hurt them? Nova, said Astrid gently, look around you. You've created the most beautiful new region of the night sky anyone has ever seen. You've transformed loneliness into connection, emptiness into abundance, and darkness into light. I think you know much more about starkeeping than you realize. As they watched, more baby star sprites continued to appear among Nova's constellations. Each new constellation she had created seemed to be generating its own family of star guardians, tiny beings whose job it would be to maintain and protect the star patterns, just as Cosmos helped Astrid with the ancient constellations. I think, said Cosmos thoughtfully, that this is exactly what the universe intended. Nova, your gift isn't just creating new stars, it's creating new life to care for them. You're not just a constellation keeper, you're a star garden tender. A star garden tender? Nova repeated the title with wonder. Yes, said Astrid, understanding dawning in her eyes. Instead of just maintaining existing patterns like I do, you're growing entirely new ecosystems in space. These baby sprites will grow up to be guardians of your constellations, and as they mature, they'll probably help you create even more star patterns. They spent the next several hours helping Nova organize her growing family of star sprites. Astrid taught the little ones basic constellation maintenance, how to polish stars to keep them bright, how to adjust their positions when cosmic winds blew them slightly off course, and how to weave new starlight into existing patterns when needed. Cosmos shared his ancient knowledge about the different types of stars and their properties, explaining which ones were best for navigation, which ones carried the strongest wish-granting magic, and which ones were perfect for inspiring dreams and creativity. But it was Nova who proved to be the natural teacher. Her unique perspective, having grown up in emptiness and darkness, allowed her to understand exactly what the baby sprites needed to feel secure and purposeful. She showed them how to dance between the stars without disrupting their patterns, how to sing the cosmic songs that kept the constellations happy, and most importantly, how to work together as a team. The most important thing, Nova told her growing family of star sprites, is to remember that every constellation tells a story. When you're caring for the stars, you're not just maintaining pretty patterns, you're preserving the stories that help people understand their place in the universe. As the days passed, word of Nova's incredible star garden began to spread throughout the cosmic community. Other constellation keepers from distant galaxies came to visit, marveling at the new life that was flourishing in what had once been an empty void. Some were ancient beings who had been tending stars since the beginning of time, while others were young keepers like Astrid who were still learning their craft. One visitor was particularly special, an elderly woman named Celeste who introduced herself as the chief constellation keeper for the entire universal sector. She had flowing silver hair that moved like cosmic wind and robes that displayed all the constellations that had ever existed. "Nova," Celeste said, after observing the star garden for several hours, "what you've accomplished here is unprecedented. You've not only created new constellations, but you've discovered how to generate new cosmic life. The Council of Star Keepers has asked me to offer you a very special honor." "What kind of honor?" asked Nova, suddenly feeling nervous. "We would like to create an entirely new position in the cosmic hierarchy," Celeste explained. "You would become the first official star garden tender, responsible for identifying empty regions of space throughout the universe and transforming them into thriving stellar ecosystems. It would mean traveling to distant galaxies and working with constellation keepers everywhere to expand the beauty and wonder of the night sky." Nova looked around at her star garden, where dozens of baby sprites were now happily tending to the constellations she had created. The offer was incredibly tempting. The chance to bring light and life to empty corners of the universe was exactly the kind of work she had discovered she loved. "But what about my sprites?" she asked. "They're still so young, and this is their home." "They would come with you, of course," said Celeste with a smile. "In fact, part of your job would be to help them grow into full star keepers themselves. Eventually, you could establish star gardens throughout the universe, each one tended by sprites who learned their craft here with you." Astrid felt a pang of sadness at the thought of her friend traveling to distant galaxies, but she knew it was an incredible opportunity. "Nova," she said, "this is exactly what you're meant to do. You found your true calling." "But I don't want to leave you behind," Nova said, tears of starlight glistening in her eyes. "You and Cosmos are my first real friends. How can I go exploring the universe without you?" Cosmos flew over to perch on Nova's shoulder, his tiny form glowing with warmth and affection. "My dear Nova," he said gently, "true friendship isn't about staying in the same place forever. It's about supporting each other's dreams and celebrating each other's growth. Besides, the universe isn't so big that we can't visit each other." "And," added Astrid with growing excitement, "what if this is an opportunity for all of us? Celeste, would it be possible for me to sometimes travel with Nova as a consultant? I could help her understand how new star gardens might connect with existing constellation systems." Celeste's eyes twinkled with approval. "That's an excellent idea. In fact, the Council has been discussing the need for better coordination between different regions of the night sky. You could serve as a liaison, helping to ensure that new star gardens enhance rather than disrupt established constellation networks." And so began a new chapter in their cosmic adventure. Nova accepted the position of star garden tender, and over the following months, she and her growing family of star sprites began traveling to distant corners of the universe. Wherever they found regions of darkness and emptiness, they planted seeds of light that grew into magnificent new constellations.
Astrid continued her work at the Observatory of Eternal Stars, but now she also served as a traveling consultant, visiting Nova's new star gardens and helping to integrate them with existing cosmic systems. She discovered that she loved exploring new regions of space and meeting constellation keepers from other galaxies, each with their own unique approaches to stellar magic. Cosmos, despite his ancient age, found that he enjoyed the travel and adventure. His vast knowledge of cosmic history made him invaluable in understanding how new star gardens could best serve the needs of different civilizations throughout the universe. Their first major project together was transforming a massive dark nebula that had been blocking light from reaching several inhabited worlds. Working as a team, they turned the obstacle into a beautiful spiral galaxy filled with new stars and constellations that not only provided light to the shadowed worlds, but also created the most spectacular night sky any of those civilizations had ever seen. Their second project was even more ambitious, creating a network of connected star gardens that formed a cosmic highway, allowing easy travel and communication between distant galaxies. Nova's sprites grew and multiplied, becoming skilled star keepers in their own right, and establishing their own gardens in remote corners of space. As the years passed, what had started as a friendship between three lonely individuals grew into a vast cosmic community. Nova's star gardens became gathering places for beings from throughout the universe, places where travelers could rest, dreamers could find inspiration, and anyone who felt lost or alone could find their way home to themselves. The Observatory of Eternal Stars became the central hub of this new cosmic network, with Astrid serving as the coordinator who helped maintain communication and cooperation between all the different star gardens and constellation systems. The Crystal Observatory was expanded and rebuilt multiple times to accommodate visitors from distant galaxies and to house the ever-growing star map that now showed not just the ancient constellations, but thousands of new star gardens scattered throughout the universe. One evening, as Astrid stood at the top of her observatory, looking out at a night sky that was now filled with more beauty and wonder than anyone had ever imagined possible, she reflected on how much had changed since that first night when they had heard Nova's lonely voice calling from the darkness. "It's amazing," she said to Cosmos, who was perched on his favorite crystalline windowsill. "We started with just one girl who was lonely in the darkness, and now we've helped create a universe full of light and friendship." "The most beautiful gardens," Cosmos replied wisely, "always start with a single seed planted in good soil. Nova was that seed, and your kindness and understanding provided the soil. Everything that's grown since then has been the natural result of planting friendship and compassion in the darkness." As if summoned by their conversation, a message appeared in starlight on the observatory walls, a note from Nova, who is currently establishing a new star garden in a distant galaxy. "Dear friends," the message read, "I wanted you to know that the Andromedans are absolutely delighted with their new constellation cluster. The children here had never seen stars before, and watching them make their first wishes on starlight was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. Thank you for teaching me that the best magic isn't about having power over the universe, but about helping the universe become more magical for everyone. See you soon when the cosmic winds bring us back together. All my love, Nova." Astrid smiled as she read the message, feeling the warm satisfaction that comes from knowing you've helped someone find their true purpose in life. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but the most wonderful thing of all was the network of friendship and cooperation that now connected every corner of space. And every night, as children throughout the universe looked up at skies filled with both ancient constellations and new star gardens, they were seeing the result of a simple but powerful truth, that when people help each other discover their gifts and share their light, the whole universe becomes brighter and more beautiful for everyone. The end.